Chapter 1777. The reason why Lu Yi asked a void-pierced stage expert about this was not because he wanted to better protect himself. Even though the blood pupil that was formed from the profound mysteries of the wonder was powerful, it could not withstand the power of the seven-colored divine lotus. This had already been proven. Therefore, even if Lu Yi did nothing, he only needed to wait for a while for the seven-colored divine lotus to destroy the blood eye that was corroding his spirit sea, leaving him unharmed. Lu Yi only wanted to make some preparations in advance by asking a void-pierced stage expert about his techniques. After all, he was very concerned about the spirit marks hidden in the blood eye. If it was someone else who asked him, the void-pierced stage expert would certainly ignore it. However, since he was indebted to Lu Yi, it was not appropriate for him to hide anything. Besides, others could not imitate his techniques either. Immediately he said, "I do have some techniques that allow me to sense it in advance. However, they are not accurate." Lu Yi asked, "Can fellow Taoist teach me? Of course I can pay you some rewards." The void-pierced stage expert waved his hand. "It's not that I'm unwilling to teach you. It's just that no one can imitate this technique. Fellow Taoist, please look at my right eye." Lu Yi immediately looked in the direction of the voice. As far as his eyes could see, some strange changes suddenly occurred to the void-pierced stage expert's right eye. The white of an ordinary person's eye would be wrapped around the black pupil. It was the same for the right eye of a void-pierced stage expert. However, as soon as his voice fell, all of his eyes suddenly turned white. Not a single trace of black could be seen. It looked extremely strange. The void-pierced stage expert blinked and his white right eye returned to normal. To tell you the truth, this right eye of mine is very strange. Before I started cultivating, I already saw things that were different from ordinary people. After entering the cultivation world, I cultivated a few eye techniques based on this eye. Of course, those eye techniques are not the reason why I can sense the changes of the magic eye. Every time the magic eye is about to change, this right eye of mine will feel a faint pain. The closer the time, the more intense the pain will be. That's why I can know in advance when the magic eye will blink. Lu Yi was enlightened. The little human race had been collecting information about this wonder for so many years, but they still could not detect when the magic eye would blink. However, the void-pierced stage expert that he met actually had such a technique. It turned out that it was because his right eye was born with a mystical ability. Besides, I can't sense it completely. Out of 10 times, I can't sense it at least half of the time. However, every time my right eye changes, the magic eye will blink. When I saw fellow Taoist just now, I sensed it. Lu Yi finally understood. As expected, this wasn't something that could be taught. However, he wasn't too disappointed. If he could grasp this method, he would be able to gain the upper hand. If he couldn't, it wouldn't matter too much. Of course, if he really wants to gain the upper hand, he could choose to travel together with a void-pierced stage expert. That way, Lu Yi would know once he sensed something. However, it was impossible for two people who did not know each other to be so devoted to each other just because of a little interaction. How about this, fellow Taoist? Chong Su pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Why don't we leave a musical note mark on each other? That way, I'll be able to send you a message when I'm aware of something, and you'll be able to prepare yourself." "Sure." Lu Yi nodded and took out a musical note. After a short while, the two of them left their musical notes with each other. Then Chong Su reminded him again, "After all, this is the inner part of the wonder. Therefore, the distance limit of the transmission of musical notes is different from the outside world. If fellow Taoist is too far away from me, I won't be able to contact you. I usually move around this area. If there are any changes, I'll inform fellow Taoist in advance." "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi thanked him. Chong Su was a very meticulous person. After thinking for a while, he asked again, "Fellow Taoist, how long have you been here?" Chong Su stroked his beard and smiled. "It should be around 30 years. When I was young, I pursued the growth of my strength and consumed a lot of spiritual pills. Some of the pill toxins are stubborn and cannot be removed using ordinary methods. Thus, I can only place my hopes on them. Besides, when the devil eye blinks, it can also temper the power of my divine soul. It will also be of some help to me when I break through to the sunshine realm." 30 years. Lu Yi sighed. He had not cultivated for so many years. However, the higher a cultivator's cultivation base was, the longer they would stay in a certain realm. 30 years was a very long time to him. However, to Chong Su, even though it was not short, it was still acceptable for the sake of the sunshine realm. Besides, judging from his appearance, he might be staying here for a longer period of time. Fellow Taoist Lu, being young is an asset. However, you shouldn't pursue the advancement of your cultivation base too much. If you act impulsively in a moment of haste, You might have to pay a price 1,000 times more to make up for it when you're old. Chong Su's words were sincere and earnest. Obviously, he misunderstood that Lu Yi had consumed a large number of spiritual pills to grow stronger when he saw that Lu Yi had such a high cultivation base at such a young age. I've learned a lot. Thank you for your reminder. Lu Yi nodded. Next, he went to look for a void peer stage expert to inquire about some information. He focused on asking him if he had encountered anything strange in this place. The void peer stage expert did not try to hide anything from him. He told him everything that he knew. Most of the information he asked was not valuable. Some of them were information that Lu Yi had already obtained from the Shao human race. However, there was one thing that Lu Yi was concerned about. More than 10 years ago, when the demonic eye blinked, there were 2 cultivators who were fighting fiercely near a void peer stage expert. Under normal circumstances, he would not interfere in such situations. Besides, he would basically stay within the area of the formation that he had set up to resist the corrosion of the blood eye. Generally speaking, if the cultivators who were fighting could not determine the winner, they would regain their senses after the blood eye invaded their bodies and stop fighting. However, the situation at that time was a little strange. In the senses of a void peer stage expert, the aura of the 2 cultivators who were fighting fiercely suddenly vanished without a trace at a certain moment. He originally thought that the 2 cultivators had perished together. However, when he was safe and went to investigate, he discovered that there were no corpses at all in the area where they were fighting. Instead, there were many traces of a fight. Lu Yi knew that it was not true that a void peer stage expert went to investigate. His real intention was to search the corpses. Thus he did not expose him. Instead he asked, "Did the place where the 2 of them fought go beyond the range of your senses?" Chong Su shook his head and said, "That's impossible. Although that place is not close to where I am, it is not beyond the range of my spirit sense. Their disappearance is very strange. It happened in an instant. But speaking of which, there are indeed many cultivators who have disappeared for no reason in this place." Lu Yi knew about this because there were records of it in the intelligence of the Shao human race. The Shao human race had speculated about this. Among those cultivators who went missing, there were certainly some who died in battle. However, some of them must have accidentally come into contact with the core of Mount Fangsuan. Mount Fangsuan was extremely mysterious. It did not look big from the outside, but there was an entire world inside it. Even if it was divided into 3 parts, this mysterious characteristic did not change. Since that was the case, the core of Mount Fangsuan that was lost must have also retained this characteristic. In other words, it was true that it was a core, but there was definitely a world inside it. If someone accidentally came into contact with this core, that person would most likely fall into that world. Yu Yao, who was an outsider sent by the Shao human race over the past countless years, had definitely fallen into that world and could not escape. The 2 cultivators who had mysteriously disappeared more than 10 years ago had probably encountered the same thing. Otherwise, it was impossible for a void peer stage expert to not discover anything. After learning about this, Lu Ye's interest was immediately piqued. He quickly asked the void peer stage expert about the specific location where the 2 cultivators went missing. Upon hearing his words, the void peer stage expert said, "That location is a little far from here. It's not very clear if I can just tell you. I'll bring you there." He could tell that Lu Yi was not inquiring about this for no reason. There should be something. However, he guessed that Lu Yi might have some seniors who had gone missing here. Thus, he wanted to investigate the specific situation. Since he was doing Lu Yi a favor, it was not a problem for him to lead the way for Lu Yi. "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi was very grateful. If he was not mistaken, the core of Mount Fangsuan should be at that location. Immediately, the 2 of them set off and flew towards a certain direction. This wonder was filled with a large number of meteorites. Therefore, it was not easy for them to move forward using the planetary boat. It would be faster if they used their physical bodies. Along the way, Lu Yi chatted with the void peer stage experts from time to time, hoping to find out more information. Unfortunately, he did not get any useful information. Void peer stage experts, on the other hand, could occasionally collect formed spirit jades and spirit crystals from certain meteorites or strange dust. He had been here for more than 30 years. The spirit jades and spirit crystals that he brought here in the early years were probably all used up. Fortunately, there was no lack of these things inside the wonder. It was not a big problem for him to collect as much as he could to satisfy his daily needs. After traveling for a few days, the void peer stage expert stopped and looked around. Then he said, "It should be this area." However, fellow Taoists should know that the environment inside the wonder is not always the same. Therefore, I can only make a rough judgment. I can't be too sure. Lu Yi nodded to express his understanding. Then how big is the error in your estimation? It's possible for it to be within 1,500 li asterisk, 500 m per li. The void pierce stage expert replied. 1,500 li asterisk, 500 m per li. This was not just a flat surface. It was 1,500 li asterisk, 500 m per li, of a complete space. This range was huge. Even with Lu Ye's current strength, it was not that easy for him to search through this area within 1,500 li asterisk, 500 m per li. Thank you, fellow Taoist. The void pierce stage expert nodded. If you encounter any difficulties, you can just send me a message. If I sense anything here, I will also inform you in advance. The void pierce stage expert quickly left. He did not mention that he wanted to stay and help. He did not know what Lu Yi was going to do. If he rashly mentioned it, he might violate the taboo. Leaving immediately was a wise decision. After the void pierce stage expert left, Lu Yi finally calmed down. Then, with a flick of his finger, 5 drops of precious blood flew out and transformed into his appearance. Lu Yi then activated the power of his innate talent tree and condensed his innate talent tree clones. His true body and 6 clones were gathered here. Get to work. Get to work. Lu Yi gave an order. The 6 clones flew in all directions and began to search carefully. He did not let go of any meteorites, because he considered that they might be the core of Mount Fangsuan and he might fall into it if he recklessly touched them. Lu Yi used his magic power to attack them directly from afar. Ordinary meteorites would certainly not be able to withstand his attacks and would be directly crushed into powder. If there was a meteorite that was not destroyed, it would certainly be suspicious. It might be the thing that Lu Yi was looking for. End of chapter. Chapter 1778. 1 month passed by in the blink of an eye. Lu Yi was still very busy. He only stopped after 1 month had passed. He stood in the void with his brows tightly knitted together. During this 1 month, his true body and his 6 clones had almost turned the area within a radius of 3,000 li asterisk, 500 m per li, upside down. All the meteorites and suspicious objects were destroyed, turning this area into a veritable vacuum zone. However, to his disappointment, he did not discover anything at all despite being busy for 1 month. He originally thought that the core of Mount Fangsuan should be in this area. However, it turned out to be different from what he had imagined. The information provided by a void pierce stage expert should not be a problem. It was not that Lu Yi trusted him very much. It was just that there was no need for a void pierce stage expert to lie to him about such a trivial matter. So what was the problem? Lu Yi guessed that perhaps the void pierce stage expert had remembered the location wrongly. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not quite possible. After all, the void pierce stage expert was Yu Yao. It was impossible for her to remember something that happened more than 10 years ago incorrectly. The other possibility was that the reason for the disappearance of the 2 cultivators who had mysteriously disappeared in this place in the past might be different from what he had imagined. They did not accidentally come into contact with the core of Mount Fangsuan. Of course, there was also another possibility. His guess was right. However, after 10 years, the core of Mount Fangsuan that was originally here had drifted to another place due to some unknown reasons. During these days, he discovered that the meteorites and the floating continent inside this wonder were not static. Sometimes, some changes would occur due to the actions of the cultivators. He decided to expand the scope of his search. After all, for now, the information he obtained from the void pierce stage experts was the only thing he could dig deeper into. A few days later, while Lu Yi was busy, the sound talisman suddenly vibrated. At first he was stunned. Then he realized that it should be a void pierce stage expert contacting him. After all, no one else could send him a message in this place other than him. He took out the sound talisman and checked it. Sure enough, it was a message from a void pierce stage expert, telling him that Mo Tong was about to blink again. Without a doubt, a void pierce stage expert had sensed it and informed him in advance according to their previous agreement. Lu Yi replied with a message to express his gratitude. Then he recalled his clones and found a place to settle down, waiting patiently. Searching for the core of Mount Fangsuan was the main objective of this trip. However, judging from the current situation, this task was a little difficult. Lu Yi's eyes. But in the blink of an eye, the blood-eye spirit rune that shone in the sky above the divine sea was a real benefit. If he could comprehend it, even if he didn't find the core of Mount Fangsuan, it wouldn't be a complete waste. Another half a day passed as they waited in peace. Suddenly, their surroundings turned dark for a moment. Just like last time, after this moment of darkness, Lu Yi clearly felt some unusual changes inside the wonder. The feeling of being watched by someone in the dark was born again. At the same time he also felt a strange connection. It was as if there was something far away that was resonating with him. The last time the demonic eye blinked, Lu Yi had this feeling. However, at that time, his mind was immersed in the divine sense sea. When the demonic eye in the divine sense sea was broken by the seven-colored god Lotus, this kind of connection disappeared, making him unable to investigate. Who would have thought that this connection would appear again? He couldn't help but raise his head and look into the distance. He was very curious. Just what was inside this wonder that resonated with him? Why did it only appear every time the demonic eye blinked? Was this connection unique to him, or was it shared by all the cultivators here? What made Lu Yi even more puzzled was that the direction of the connection this time was completely different from the last time. This also meant that if there was really something inside the wonder that was connected to him, this thing had moved a long distance during this period of time. As this thought flashed through his mind, Lu Yi made a decision. Comprehending the Blood Eye Spirit Rune was an opportunity that couldn't be missed. However, Lu Yi also wanted to find out more about this mysterious connection. He immediately separated a part of his mind and immersed himself in the divine sense sea to observe the Blood Eye Spirit Rune. At the same time, his body swayed and rushed forward in the direction of the connection. Due to the influence of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune, all kinds of illusions appeared in front of his eyes. They were broken and repeated. At the same time, a surge of anger inexplicably surged in his heart. His mood became extremely irritable and he couldn't wait to find someone to fight. He naturally knew that this was the influence of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune, but he didn't deliberately suppress it. This was because it wouldn't be long before the Rainbow Divine Lotus broke the Blood Eye Spirit Rune. At that time he would be able to break free from this influence. As he moved forward, his magic power surged. Coincidentally, there were traces of cultivators nearby. They sensed the fluctuations of his magic power and immediately blocked his path. Lu Yi suppressed the anger in his heart. He didn't want to get into a dispute with anyone. Firstly, he didn't want to waste time. Secondly, there was no enmity between them, so there was no need to get into a conflict. However, when he saw the cultivator blocking his path, he knew that he didn't have to suppress anything anymore. This was because the person blocking his path was actually from the insect race. Although this fellow had a humanoid figure, the characteristics of the insect race were too obvious. The surface of his body was wrapped in a layer of white carapace, as if his bones were grown on the outside. He had a thin body, long arms, and moved like the wind. He held a long bone blade in his hand, and the blade was densely packed with fine sawteeth. His two eyes looked extremely strange, obviously having the unique compound eyes of the insect race. When Lu Yi saw this insect race, he immediately thought of the mantis insect race that he had killed before. If those mantis insect race had enough time to grow and transform into their human forms, they should have looked like this. The insect race's cultivation base was not bad. The magic power fluctuations around his body seemed to be even stronger than that of a Void Peer Stage expert. The true cultivation base of a Void Peer Stage expert should be at the peak of the Moonjade realm because he was preparing to break through to the Sunshine realm. However, due to the suppression of the environment in this wonder, he could only display the strength of a late Moonjade realm expert. However, the foundation that this insect race displayed was even stronger than a Void Peer Stage expert. This was somewhat abnormal. Lu Yi immediately reacted. The insect race had probably also participated in the battle for the reincarnation tree and obtained some benefits in the Alpha Origin realm. Just like him, the insect race was not suppressed by the environment of this wonder. This was also normal. Other than the time when he participated in the Alpha Origin realm, the insect race and the blood race basically always had a chance to win in the Alpha Origin realm. In the blink of an eye, the insect race's rationality was obviously affected. He roared and charged towards Lu Yi. Spiritual light flashed on the bone blade in his hand and he swung it down fiercely. Space seemed to have been cut open by this slash. Wherever the blade passed, a black line was left behind. Lu Yi did not have the time to tangle with him. Before the Blood Eye Spirit runes were destroyed by the seven-colored Divine Lotus, he had to get as close to the target as possible. Moreover, he was currently affected by the Blood Eye Spirit runes. His emotions were very irritable. Therefore, he did not hesitate at all in the face of this slash. When he unsheathed the mountain coiling saber, the might of the sword draw was already activated. Speaking of which, this was the first time he truly fought against someone after advancing to the Mid-Moonjade realm. The insect race's strength was very strong. It was a good opportunity for him to test the growth of his strength. When he was at the early Moonjade realm, he had used the sword draw to injure a late Moonjade realm expert. Now that he was at the mid-moon jade realm, the might of this slash was much stronger than before. In an instant, a bright light illuminated a large area of the void. Even the vision of the insect race's Yu Yao was blocked. His instincts of life or death crisis made him hurriedly change the direction of his saber to block the attack. At the same time, his body rapidly retreated. The insect race felt a sharp pain on his chest. Affected by the blood-eye spirit runes, his irritable emotions suddenly cleared up for an instant. He steadied himself and looked down, only to see a large wound extending from his abdomen to his shoulder. He, a late moon jade realm expert, had almost been dismembered by a single slash. The insect race's head was covered in cold sweat. Seeing that Lu Yi was not going to let him off after gaining the upper hand, he immediately reached out and grabbed at the void. Another identical bone saber appeared in his hand. Then he steadied himself and raised one saber to the sky. His scarlet eyes became focused, and Lu Ye's figure was reflected in his eyes. In the next instant the bone saber slashed out. Lu Yi, who was chasing after him, felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity when the insect race took out a second bone saber and assumed such a strange posture. He had faced similar situations countless times when he was in the constellation realm. As this thought flashed through his mind, the insect race's bone saber had already slashed down. At the same time his body began to spin. Each slash was faster than the last, and each slash was heavier than the last. In the blink of an eye, the insect race's body seemed to have turned into a spinning top. The place where he stood turned into a storm of blades that swept through the void. No one could ignore such a violent attack. Anyone caught in the storm of blades would be swept away by it. If they could not block a single slash, they would be chopped into pieces. Not even a complete corpse would be left behind. Lu Yi was like a canoe in the middle of a raging storm, in danger of capsizing at any moment. However, as the mountain saber gently pierced forward, the storm of blades suddenly stopped, and the surging transcendence energy dissipated. The insect race's moon jade realm expert stood stiffly on the spot, still holding his two bone sabers. He lowered his head and looked at the mountain saber that had pierced through his heart. Then he looked up at Lu Yi standing in front of him and said, "Impossible." This was a supreme secret technique passed down by his ancestors. It was extremely powerful. Ever since he started cultivating it, he had used this secret technique to kill countless powerful enemies. He had even defeated many stronger opponents as the weak. Against Lu Yi, a mid-stage moon jade realm expert, he had used this technique with all his might. He had never imagined that this secret technique, which had always been successful, would be so easily broken by someone else. And he would have to pay the price with his life. If Lu Yi had broken his technique before he had activated his saber aura, that would have been understandable. However, he had already activated his saber aura. Even if his opponent was stronger than him, they would not be able to break his technique so easily. Shock, anger, disbelief, and many other complex emotions filled his heart. The insect race expert could feel his life force slipping away. He raised his bone saber with all his might and slashed at Lu Yi one last time. However, how could Lu Yi give him this chance? He circulated his transcendence energy, and the mountain saber trembled. The insect race expert's body was instantly riddled with holes. The saber slash became light, and Lu Yi easily dodged it. End of chapter. Chapter 1779. On the battlefield, Yu Yao's corpse lay strewn across the ground. Lu Yi had already left. His opponent's death was a little unjust because he had used the Great Windmill secret technique at the last moment. When Lu Yi first cultivated this secret technique, he had wondered if the insect race also had an inheritance of this secret technique. After all, Jianghu, who had created this secret technique, was from the insect race. However, Lu Yi had never encountered this secret technique until today. When his opponent assumed that posture, he could tell that it was the Great Windmill secret technique's starting stance. If it had been another Yu Yao, she would have had no chance of breaking this secret technique unless she acted before her opponent's saber aura was activated. However, Lu Yi had been killed by Jianghu countless times. In terms of cultivation of this secret technique, he was confident that he was not inferior to his opponent. Naturally, he knew the various mysteries of this secret technique. It would be easy to break this secret technique. Of course, even if he had never cultivated this secret technique, he only needed to use a sweeping technique to distance himself. When his opponent's saber aura was exhausted, he would still be able to easily reap the harvest. Using this secret technique placed a great burden on one's body. Even if his opponent was a late-stage Yu Yao, she would not be able to maintain this secret technique for too long. The twists and turns along the way delayed Lu Yi for about 20 breaths of time. After collecting his opponent's 2 bone sabers and storage ring, he continued on his journey. After a while he frowned. All the negative emotions in his mind were swept away at this moment. The 7-colored divine lotus had broken through the blood eye. He had made some progress in observing the blood eye spirit rune, but not much. At this rate, Lu Yi estimated that he would have to experience another 20 to 30 blinks of the demonic eye before he could fully comprehend the blood eye spirit rune. This would take a very long time. The demonic eye spirit rune had no pattern at all. Even if it came once every month, 20 to 30 blinks would still take 2 years. If it came once every 3 to 5 months, it would take even longer. More importantly, after the blood eye spirit rune was broken, that faint connection had also been severed. However, Lu Yi did not stop. Instead, he continued to fly forward according to his senses. In his opinion, although the connection had been severed, the source must still be in this direction. If he continued searching like this, he might be able to discover something. He was not sure if the source was as he guessed, but this was still an opportunity. If it was as he guessed, then there was one question that could not be explained. Why would this source respond to him from afar? Could it be because of the 3 red talismans in his body? The 3 red talismans came from the humanoid race, so it made sense that they were connected to the unknown source. Because according to Lu Ye's guess, that unknown source was the core of Mount Innerheart. But in the end it was still very difficult. In the past, Yu Yao, who had been sent here by the dwarf tribe, would definitely have been bestowed with spirit talismans by the dwarf tribe. She might not have 3 red talismans, but she would at least have 1. He hadn't heard any of the Yu Yao from the other races mention such a thing. But if it wasn't the red talisman, then what else could it be? Lu Yi once again thought of Su Yuqing. After becoming one with this woman, his body was tainted with the aura of the Minimen race. He had even refined a part of Su Yuqing's cultivation, which was why he was able to participate in the Black Abyss martial arts exhibition as a human. Mount Innerheart was the birthplace of the dwarf tribe, and he had the aura of the dwarf tribe on him. Perhaps this was the reason? But that didn't seem right. Su Yuqing had said that for some reason, the core of Mount Innerheart had been avoiding the dwarf tribe. Thus, in the early days, the Yu Yao of the dwarf tribe had come here to search, but they had found nothing. Left with no choice, they had asked the Yu Yao of the other races to deal with this matter. In the end, the Yu Yao of the other races had also found nothing, and some of them had even gone missing. If this was purely because of the aura of the dwarf tribe, there was no reason for Su Yuqing not to mention this matter. He couldn't understand, so he could only search for the source and investigate. Whether this source was the core of Mount Innerheart or not, he would know once he found it. Actually, he was still puzzled about one thing. Why would the core of Mount Innerheart hide from the dwarf tribe? Logically speaking, it should have taken the initiative to accept them. After all, the relationship between the 2 races was extraordinary, and the entire dwarf tribe had been born from Mount Innerheart. There were many questions that couldn't be answered. He continued forward, but he found nothing. It wasn't until a few days later that Lu Yi, who was searching along the way, sensed something approaching her area from afar. The other party didn't have any signs of life, so it shouldn't be a living thing. Its speed didn't seem very fast either. He released his divine perception to investigate, and soon discovered that it was a meteorite about the size of a water tank. It didn't look very eye-catching, but it could be seen everywhere in this wonder. This meteorite was probably being moved by some kind of power, and it was drifting in this wonder. This was a very common situation. Lu Yi had encountered many meteorites like this before, so he didn't pay much attention to it. He just glanced at it out of habit. Lu Yi didn't expect to see trouble with just one glance. Almost at the same time that he noticed this meteorite flying toward him, he suddenly felt a great sense of danger, and an inexplicable feeling of impending doom lingered in his heart. Lu Yi immediately stopped, and at the same time he became vigilant of his surroundings. He thought that there was some powerful expert lying in ambush around him. And to be able to make him feel such a sense of danger, and to be unable to detect any traces of it, this expert must be very powerful. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly discovered that the meteorite flying toward him had unreasonably increased its speed by a lot. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived a few dozen kilometers in front of him. Suddenly, an inexplicable mysterious force surged out, causing ripples to appear in the void, spreading out in all directions with the meteorite as the center. Almost at the same time as this mysterious force surged out, Lu Yi fled backwards. The next moment, his eyes widened greatly, because as the ripples in the void disappeared, everything within a few dozen kilometers around the meteorite had disappeared. It was as if everything had been swallowed by the meteorite. Lu Yi felt a burst of fear. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly enough, otherwise even he would have been swallowed up. Although he didn't know what the consequences of being swallowed up like this would be, it obviously wasn't a good thing. Seeing that Lu Yi was unharmed, the meteorite sped up even more and flew straight towards him. Lu Yi was shocked. Was this coming for him? He didn't dare to be sure, so he immediately dodged and flashed to the side. The inconspicuous meteorite also changed its direction and followed closely behind him. The mysterious energy fluctuated from time to time, and everywhere it passed, large expanses of the void would become a vacuum. After a moment, Lu Yi finally confirmed one thing. This meteorite was indeed coming for him, because no matter how he changed direction, the other party was still hot on his tail. This was clearly a meteorite without any signs of life and looked like it could be seen anywhere, but it actually had such a mysterious ability. There was only one thought in Lu Ye's mind: found it. This was obviously the core of Minuscule Mountain. To be honest, he didn't think that his trip would go so smoothly. Because since ancient times, the lesser humans had already spent too much time, manpower, energy and material resources on this matter, but so far there hadn't been much progress. Lu Yi had come here because Su Yuqing had personally mentioned this matter to him, and also because he thought that if he could find the core of Minuscule Mountain, he could fuse Minuscule Mountain with Jade Conch and become its backing. But he didn't think that he would definitely succeed on this trip, and he had long been mentally prepared to return empty-handed. So he never thought that he would actually really find the core of Minuscule Mountain. Or rather, the core of Minuscule Mountain had found him. The reason why he could determine that this was the core of Minuscule Mountain was naturally because of its strange devouring power. There was definitely a world inside Minuscule Mountain's core. Those things that had disappeared seemed to have been devoured by it, but in reality, they should have all fallen into the world inside the core. The source of the feeling he had previously was also undoubtedly the core. Actually, this feeling had already existed a month ago. It was just that Lu Yi was immersed in comprehending the Blood Eye Spirit rune at that time and didn't pay too much attention to it. He didn't pay attention, but the core of Minuscule Mountain would. So a month ago, this core had already been looking for him. It was just that after the connection was severed, the core couldn't accurately find his tracks, so it drifted in another direction. A few days ago, as the demonic eye blinked, that connection appeared again. While he was rushing, the core was also rushing toward him. It could be said that they were rushing in both directions. Until now, when they met at this location. Lu Yi couldn't see the core's true nature right away, but the core could. So it suddenly took action when Lu Yi was caught off guard. If it weren't for Lu Ye's quick reaction, he would have been devoured into the core world. As expected, this core had its own spiritual intelligence. If it had spiritual intelligence, it meant that it could communicate. As Lu Yi fled, he sent a voice transmission through his divine sense. Jade Conch Lu Yi, entrusted by Su Yuqing, Jianghu and the others of the human clan, to come here to search for the lost core. The 3 divisions of Minuscule Mountain have been divided for a long time. I hope that they can be united as soon as possible and restore the glory of our ancestors. After transmitting his voice several times, Lu Yi helplessly discovered that the core chasing after him didn't respond at all. It looked like it wouldn't rest until he was dead. Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He never imagined that there would be a day when he would be hunted down by something like this. He didn't dare to stop, and he didn't even dare to let the core get too close to him. Because from what he had seen just now, if he got too close to the core, he would definitely be devoured into its inner world. At that time, it was hard to say what the situation would be. The most ideal situation was, of course, that he could communicate with the core's spiritual intelligence and safely bring it out of here. But the other party had no intention of paying attention to him. Lu Yi couldn't understand why this was. Why did the core have a connection with him? Why was it targeting him? Since it had spiritual intelligence, why didn't it want to communicate with him? With a thought, Lu Yi raised his finger and a red light bloomed on his fingertip. He continued to transmit his voice. This is a red talisman given to me by the human clan's Rizhao before I left. If you have spiritual intelligence, you should be able to recognize it. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yi clearly felt the core chasing him pause for a moment. He was overjoyed. There was hope. End of chapter. Chapter 1780. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi was looking forward to it, the meteorite that the core had turned into accelerated and caught up to him. Lu Yi felt helpless. The core gave him the feeling that it was a little stubborn, and it did not respond to his sound transmission at all. The chase continued, and Lu Yi sadly found that his speed was not as fast as the core. If this continued, he would be caught up sooner or later. Judging from the power that the core had just displayed, once he got close to it, he would be directly swallowed into its inner world. Lu Yi did not dare to take this risk. After pondering for a moment, he raised his hand, and a drop of blood seeped out from his fingertip. With a flick of his finger, the blood flew in a certain direction. He was going to use the blood clone and the void spirit pattern to get rid of the core's pursuit. He had used similar methods many times before, and every time, it had allowed him to escape from a strong enemy. However, he had mostly relied on Imperial equipment before, and now it was undoubtedly more convenient to use the blood clone. However, he never expected that this move would cause an even greater change. As the blood was ejected, the core, which was originally simple and unadorned, like a meteorite that could be seen everywhere, suddenly shone with a red light, and in an instant, it turned into a blood stone. If that was all there was to it, it wouldn't be a big deal. The key was that after the core turned into a blood stone, a mysterious pressure spread out. This mysterious pressure was not real, but it gave him an incomparably familiar feeling. Lu Yi could not help but reveal a look of astonishment. At the same time, the core, which was not slow to begin with, suddenly accelerated, closing the distance between it and Lu Yi in the blink of an eye. The terrifying devouring power swept out in all directions. Within a radius of 100 miles, all the dust, meteorites, and even Lu Yi and the blood that had been ejected not far away disappeared in an instant. The void returned to calm. The blood-colored brilliance slowly disappeared, and the core returned to its original state. Even if a cultivator passed by nearby, they would not be able to see anything strange about it. Lu Yi felt as if he was falling into a bottomless abyss, an abyss that would never end. Although the process was not wonderful, he did not panic because if he was right, he was not in too much danger now. He was just being swallowed by the core. In other words, he would probably appear in the inner world of the core later. As he fell, all sorts of thoughts flashed through his mind. Combining them with what he had just experienced, he suddenly understood many things. He activated his dermic powers and enhanced himself with defensive spirit runes to protect his entire body. After an unknown period of time, the lightless field of vision suddenly turned dark red, and then the aura of the entire world enveloped him. However, before Lu Yi could do anything, he felt a sharp pain in his back and fell heavily to the ground, creating a large crater in the process. Fortunately, his physique was strong and such a fall did not cause any substantial damage to him. Dust flew everywhere. Lu Yi did not rush to get up. He just stared at the hazy sky. He was still alive, which meant that his previous guess was right. After being swallowed by the core, there was no danger to his life. He would only fall into the core's inner world. Xiao Chen's mind was unprecedentedly clear. He finally figured out many of the doubts that he could not figure out before. Previously, Su Yuqing had told him that the core of Mount Fangsuan seemed to be intentionally avoiding Yu Yao of the dwarf race. This had puzzled him. Logically speaking, if the core of Mount Fangsuan really had intelligence, it should be close to the dwarf race. Even if it was not close, it should not be intentionally avoiding them. Now, he understood that this intentional avoidance was the core of Mount Fangsuan's protection for the dwarf race. It did not want the dwarf race to have any contact with him. The root of all this was the change in the core. This core had the aura of the blood race, and it was an extremely noble aura of the blood race. The blood ancestor. Mount Fangsuan had split apart because the blood ancestor wanted this starry sky's supreme treasure. Many years ago, he had led the blood race under his command to attack Mount Fangsuan. Lu Yi did not know the final result of that battle, but based on the current situation, although the blood ancestor had split Mount Fangsuan apart, he had not achieved his goal. Even so, the core of Mount Fangsuan had been stained with the blood ancestor's sacred blood. This could be seen from the core's sudden transformation into a blood stone when it was chasing him. When the core had turned into a blood stone, it had emitted a pressure that Lu Yi was incomparably familiar with. This was the unique holiness of the blood race. Others might not have been able to sense it, but Lu Yi could. After all, he had refined a great deal of sacred blood, and he himself had an extremely profound holiness. In the past, no matter what kind of blood race he encountered, even if their cultivation was higher than his, they were not even worthy of carrying his shoes in terms of holiness. Take Ma Shangxi for example. Yu Yao's peak holiness was not even a fraction of Lu Ye's. A single drop of her precious blood was enough to make her a blood servant. But just now, the holiness that had seeped out from the bloodstone that the core had transformed into was something that even Lu Yi could not compare to. If he were really a blood race member, he would not even have the strength to lift a finger under the effects of that holiness. His holiness was obtained by refining countless sacred blood using his talent tree. Which blood race member in this world could compare to him in terms of holiness? Only the source of the blood race, the already dead blood ancestor, could surpass him in this field. Minuscule mountain had been split apart, and the core had been contaminated by the blood ancestor's sacred blood. This made sense, but the core's sentience was clearly still present. Thus, Yu Yao of the Miniman tribe would not have discovered anything. The core was also afraid that the Miniman tribe would take it away. If that was the case, then once the three divisions of Minuscule Mountain merged, the entire Miniman tribe would be implicated. Lu Yi finally understood why he and the core could communicate from afar, and why the core was intentionally searching for him. It was because he had the inheritance of the blood race that the core, which had been contaminated with the blood ancestor's sacred blood, could sense his existence. The core had been split apart by the blood ancestor, so it most likely hated the blood race to the core. This was why it had persistently pursued him after sensing his existence. The core had obviously mistaken him for a member of the blood race. As for Lu Ye's various voice transmissions, the core definitely did not believe them. After figuring this out, Lu Yi immediately realized that the Miniman tribe's plan to find the core and reunite the three divisions would most likely be difficult. If he wanted to do this, he would first have to find a way to leave this world. Secondly, he would have to solve the problem of the blood ancestor's sacred blood corroding Minuscule Mountain. As for the latter, he could perhaps give it a try with the power of his innate skill tree. Hence, there was only one problem before him: how to leave this world. This was most likely not going to be easy. Lu Yi reckoned that he was definitely not the only cultivator who had unintentionally fallen into the inner world throughout history. However, no one had leaked any information about this place, so they had most likely been trapped here this entire time. He stared intently at the sky. Most importantly, the thick haze was a crimson color, not the inky black color that he knew. He could even sense the faint aura of the blood race from within the crimson haze. He suddenly sensed several auras rapidly approaching him, and all of them appeared to be quite powerful. Sure enough, there were many trapped cultivators in the inner world. His fall from the sky had caused quite a commotion, so it was likely that nearby cultivators had been alerted and had come to investigate. These cultivators stopped about a dozen kilometers away from him. They had no intention of approaching him. It wasn't that they were afraid of him, but rather that they were holding each other back. A series of divine senses swept over to investigate his situation. Soon, a vigorous voice sounded. "He's not dead, he's still alive. Perhaps he's just dizzy from the fall." Another voice that sounded a little old rang out. "This kid. This old man wants him." The vigorous voice immediately sounded again, clearly dissatisfied. "Wang Taixing, do you have any shame? This place is obviously the closest to my cave abode, so why do you want him?" The elderly voice replied, "Because I'm a human and he's also a human." The vigorous voice sneered. "Human? There's only one race here, and you have the nerve to say you're a human? Go out and see which human will acknowledge you." The elderly voice fell silent for a moment. The vigorous voice spoke again. "According to the rules we agreed on, he's mine if he falls near my cave abode." "There's no problem with that." A soft and pleasant voice sounded. "You should be a woman. This place is also very close to our cave abode, so can he be considered ours?" The vigorous voice said angrily, "You already got one last time and you want another one this time? Otherwise, we'll give you all the ones that fall near here in the future." The soft voice giggled. "If Dao brother is willing, we sisters will be eternally grateful." "I'm afraid you're dreaming." The elderly voice spoke again. "The two of you, since he's a human, please give him to this old man. This old man will be eternally grateful." The vigorous voice scolded angrily. "Don't talk about the human race. You're only interested in the resources he brought in, so why would you be interested in him?" The three sides argued endlessly, making a lot of noise. "You're so noisy." A slightly dissatisfied voice came from the center of the three sides. The arguing cultivators all turned their heads to look, only to see a young figure slowly standing up from the pit and patting the dust off his body. However, the other party didn't look at them. Instead, he was staring at the sky. Seeing this, the cultivators all knew what Lu Yi was thinking. This was the first thought that came to their minds when they fell here. The owner of the vigorous voice crossed his arms, looking like he was waiting to watch a good show. The owner of the elderly voice frowned slightly. He wanted to warn Lu Yi, but he also knew that words were useless. Without experiencing some setbacks, it would be difficult to accept them. Under the gazes of the cultivators, Lu Yi soared into the sky. "He's a mid-stage moon jade." The vigorous voice judged Lu Ye's cultivation, and at the same time, joy appeared on his face. If Lu Yi was a mid-stage moon jade, then he should have brought a lot of resources with him. In their field of vision, Lu Ye's figure had already disappeared into the dark red haze. Soon, the fluctuations of magic power came from the depths of the haze. End of chapter. Chapter 1781. After a long time, Lu Yi rushed back from the haze. There was an invisible barrier behind the thick haze, blocking the way forward. He tried many methods to break through the barrier, but he couldn't do anything. He knew the situation was similar to what he thought. It would be difficult to get out after falling into the inner world. The barrier was undoubtedly a barrier that separated the inside from the outside world. Unless he had the power to destroy the entire world, he couldn't break through it. Maybe he could talk to the inner world's intelligence. Lu Yi thought to himself. The inner world didn't respond to his voice transmissions. Now that he was trapped here, the inner world should respond as long as he proved he wasn't a vampire. The inner world hated vampires, and he was indeed here on Rizhao's request, so he naturally had the advantage of being close to them. After making up his mind, Lu Yi looked up. There were 4 cultivators gathered around him. One was tall and sturdy, one had an old face but looked hale and hearty, and 2 beautiful women stood side by side. The tall and sturdy man looked like a human, but judging from their conversation he shouldn't be one. Lu Yi couldn't tell which race he was from. In the starry sky, there were actually many races that looked no different from the human race on the surface. As for the old man, he should be a human. As for the 2 women, their auras were cold, their hair was white as snow, and even their skin was flawless. Lu Yi had a feeling they were from the Snow Clan. The Snow Clan was a small clan in the starry sky. There weren't many of them, but they were much better than the Mermaid Clan and the Fey Clan. They were about the same size as the 5-element Spirit Clan. Lu Yi had stayed in the Wanxiang Sea for so long that he had seen cultivators from all races. The Snow Clan was naturally familiar to him. He should be able to inquire about the inner world from these cultivators. This was what he needed to do now, but judging from their conversation, it wouldn't be easy. While he was thinking, the tall and sturdy man said, "Kid, no matter where you come from or what your identity is, you have to cut off your past here, understand?" Lu Yi just looked at him quietly. The tall and sturdy man frowned. "Why do you sound so silly? Forget it, you won't understand. Come back to my cave residence with me first. I'll tell you more when I have time." As soon as he finished speaking, he reached out to grab Lu Yi. Lu Yi blinked his eyes but did not move. However, just as the burly man was about to grab him, a withered old hand swatted over from the side. Immediately, a figure flashed and blocked Lu Ye's path. The majestic man frowned. "Wang Taixing, you must be tired of living." Wang Taixing remained unmoved. "The matter hasn't been settled yet, and you're already in a hurry to make a move. I'm afraid that's not very good, right?" "Talk my ass." The majestic man cursed angrily. Obviously, he was also a hot-tempered person. Without saying a word, he directly attacked Wang Taixing. Both of them were at the late stage of Moonjade realm. As they began to fight, the sound of magic power filled the air. Lu Yi took advantage of the situation and floated back a little. However, after looking around, he knew that neither Wang Taixing nor the burly man were serious. They were obviously holding back as if they were guarding against something. Soon, Lu Yi knew what they were guarding against. Because at that moment, the 2 Snow Clan women suddenly rushed towards him, one from the left and one from the right. They seemed to want to take advantage of Wang Taixing and the burly man's fight to take him away. However, their plan did not succeed. Because as soon as Wang Taixing and the burly man sensed their movements, they immediately stopped fighting and each pounced on one of the Snow Clan women. In the blink of an eye, the 4 figures were divided into 2 battlefields. The battle was intense. Lu Yi looked on coldly from the sidelines as if nothing had happened. What surprised Lu Yi was that all 4 of them were at the late stage of Moonjade realm. However, although their cultivation levels were the same, there was a slight difference in their strength. The old man, Wang Taixing, was undoubtedly the strongest, proving that ginger was spicier as it got older. The second strongest was the burly man, and the 2 Snow Clan women were relatively weaker. With such a split battlefield, the 2 women were clearly at a disadvantage. "Big sister." A soft voice suddenly called out. In the next moment, a scene that shocked Lu Yi appeared. As the soft voice rang out, a bloody mist suddenly appeared around the Snow Clan woman, transforming into a sea of blood that spread out in all directions. At the same time, the other Snow Clan woman with a cold temperament also activated her blood sea technique. The 2 seas of blood quickly flowed towards each other, seemingly about to merge into one. Seeing this, Wang Taixing and the burly man were not to be outdone. They also activated their blood sea technique. In the blink of an eye, a large area was enveloped by a sea of blood. No light could be seen, and even Lu Yi was not spared. Amidst the sea of blood, the battle continued. However, the Snow Clan sisters were clearly more in tune with each other. Their combined strength was much greater than Wang Taixing and the burly man's simple cooperation. As such, Lu Yi could sense that the three sides were maintaining a stalemate. He was greatly surprised because he could tell at a glance that these four Moon Yaos were not using ordinary Blood Dao secret techniques, but rather pure Blood Tribe secret techniques. These four cultivators were Blood Tribe cultivators? That wasn't right. Lu Yi had heard their conversation. Setting aside the other three, Wang Taixing was clearly a human. How could he use such a Blood Tribe secret technique? Moreover, if they really were Blood Tribe cultivators, why hadn't he seen any traces of Blood Tribe cultivators on them before? Or were they all using disguise techniques? Lu Yi had many questions but couldn't find an answer. The soft voice of the Snow Clan woman came from within the sea of blood. Gentlemen, continuing to fight like this won't solve the problem. If you fight for too long, there may be side issues. Since we can't decide who's better, I have a suggestion. The burly man's voice rang out. How about we let him choose? Whoever he chooses to go with, the other two sides can't interfere. Following this, the battle between Wang Taixing and the burly man slowly quieted down. However, the burly man was unwilling to give up. That's not a good suggestion. This brat looks silly. You two beauties have an advantage in front of him. Wang Taixing is also of the same race as him, so he has an advantage. I have nothing on my side. Besides, we've agreed on the rules before, so we have to follow the rules. If you don't follow the rules, don't blame me for not showing mercy. As he spoke, he fiercely punched out and directly blasted his opponent away. Immediately after, he turned and pounced in Lu Ye's direction, shouting fiercely, "Brat, if you want to live, throw your storage ring to me. Otherwise today will be the day you die." Lu Yi was enjoying the show. He originally wanted to inquire more about the inner world, but he didn't expect the burly man to directly target him. Sensing the other party's ferocious aura and determination to not give up until he got some benefits, Lu Yi sighed slightly. Blood chi pervaded the air. When it seeped out of his body, a thick and viscous holy aura suddenly swept out. The vast sea of blood trembled and instantly collapsed. Lu Ye's vision cleared, but he still stood quietly in place, holding his saber. His body was faintly suffused with blood chi. Not far in front of him, the burly man who was pouncing in this direction stiffened. His forehead was covered with sweat, and his face was full of horror. Behind him, the woman with the cold temperament of the Snow Clan also froze. Her snow-white cheeks became paler and paler, and even her body couldn't stop trembling. Wang Taixing's eyes were filled with horror, and the owner of the soft voice's small mouth opened so wide that a fist could be stuffed in. Several pairs of eyes stared at Lu Yi, all of them filled with disbelief. This sudden change was something none of them had expected. Several of them had regarded Lu Yi as a delicious cake, but who would have thought that this delicious cake would suddenly turn into an existence they could only look up to? They couldn't understand. In particular, the holy aura emanating from Lu Ye's body was terrifying. It was something they had never felt before. Under the suppression of this holy aura, they felt that facing Lu Yi, there was no room for resistance. Lu Yi looked at the burly man not far in front of him. "You want my storage ring?" The majestic man swallowed his saliva and felt a great terror that he had never experienced in his life descend upon his body and mind. He hurriedly shook his head like a rattledrum and forced a smile on his face. "Fellow Taoist, this is a misunderstanding." Lu Yi looked at him indifferently for a while, not intending to pursue the matter. Instead he said, "I'm new here, so I have many things I don't understand. Can anyone help me?" The burly man didn't dare to say anything. Wang Taixing was still deep in thought when the owner of the soft voice immediately said, "Fellow Taoist, ask whatever you want to know. We sisters will tell you everything we know." As she spoke, she shot a glance at her elder sister. The woman with the cold temperament understood and quickly nodded. Lu Yi nodded and withdrew his holy aura. The several Snow Moon Clan cultivators immediately felt relieved, but their expressions were still full of shock and awe as they looked at Lu Yi. They really couldn't understand how someone in this world could possess such a holy aura. After a short while, Lu Yi sat on a large rock with a long saber in his hand. The four late-stage Snow Moon Clan cultivators stood in a row not far in front of him, all of them wearing cautious expressions. In terms of cultivation, they were all a minor realm higher than Lu Yi. However, what they had just experienced made them realize that if Lu Yi wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as killing a little chick. Thus, even though Lu Yi was sitting and they were standing, none of them dared to complain. After waiting in silence, Lu Yi asked his first question. Are you members of the blood tribe? The four of them shook their heads in unison. Wang Taixing was the first to speak. This old man is Wang Taixing, a human. The burly man continued, Zhou Ran, a demon. The woman with the soft voice said, We sisters are from the Snow tribe. I am Xiang Yin and my elder sister is Xian Yu. Lu Yi frowned. Then how can you use the blood tribe's secret techniques? Xiang Yin knew that Lu Yi wanted to ask about this, so she immediately explained, Fellow Taoist, you might not know this, but all cultivators who have been stranded in this world, regardless of their race, will slowly gain some of the characteristics of the blood tribe after staying here for a long time. In fact, we don't even know what kind of race we are now. At this point, a bitter smile appeared on her face. End of chapter. Chapter 1782. Xiang Yin and the others had inadvertently come into contact with the core of Mount Minuscule, then drifted into this world. The earliest among them could be traced back to 300 years ago. Even Wang Taixing, who was the last to arrive, was from 100 years ago. But no matter what race they were originally from, after entering this place as time passed, their bodies would slowly gain some of the characteristics of the blood race, as well as some of their abilities. But they still maintained the appearance of their original race. This was undoubtedly strange. Xiang Yin continued to explain, We speculate that this place has something to do with the blood race. Since you're a member of the blood race, you should know of the blood ancestor. Lu Yi didn't respond. He simply said, Continue? But judging from Xiang Yin's words, she obviously thought of him as a true member of the blood race. It wasn't strange for such a misunderstanding to occur. The holy aura he had just activated was too strong, so it was natural for Xiang Yin to come to this conclusion. Rumor has it that the blood ancestor was the origin of the blood race. For some unknown reason, after she died, her body transformed into many realms suitable for the blood race to live in. Each of those realms is extremely important to the blood race, and you could say that they are the foundation of the blood race. We suspect that this place is one of those realms, but no one knows about it. Although we know about it, once we enter we can't leave. Naturally, we can't spread the news. Her speculation was obviously wrong. This wasn't a realm formed by the blood ancestor's body. This was the core of Mount Minuscule. The environment of this realm greatly affected us, so we slowly gained some of the blood race's abilities. To be more precise, we can be considered the first generation of the blood race. First generation of the blood race? Lu Yi revealed a puzzled expression. Xiang Yin laughed bitterly. The blood ancestor gave birth to an entire race with her own strength. Of course, she couldn't have given birth to so many people on her own. The more reliable explanation is that the blood ancestor invaded the realms of many different races and used her own methods to corrupt those races, giving them the abilities of the blood race. Just like us, the descendants of these creatures are the current blood race. This was the first time Lu Yi had heard of this, but after thinking about it carefully, it seemed quite reasonable. Lu Yi had always thought that the blood race was born from the realm created by the blood ancestor after his death. If that was the case, then the blood race didn't exist during the blood ancestor's era. However, this wasn't actually the case. This was because when the blood ancestor had attacked the Fangtzuan mountain, there were already many clansmen under his command. Where had these members of the blood race come from? Just as Xiang Yin had said, she couldn't have been born by the blood ancestor. Then what she said might be the truth. The blood ancestor had invaded a few realms and used various methods to erode the bloodlines of the living beings in those realms, turning them into existences like Xiang Yin and the others. They were the first-generation blood race. These vampires still maintained the appearance and characteristics of their original race, but they already possessed the abilities of the vampires. The descendants they gave birth to were the current vampires. If this theory was true, then regardless of whether Xiang Yin and the others maintained their race's characteristics, they could be considered members of the blood race at the root of their origins. As such, it was only natural that they would be suppressed by the holiness. Why would they become first-generation blood race members after living here for a long time? Lu Yi asked. According to his speculations, the core of the Fangtzuan mountain had been stained with the blood ancestor's holy blood. This was why the core was resonating with him from afar. When it was pursuing him, it had also emanated a holiness that left even him gasping in amazement. However, this couldn't explain the changes in Xiang Yin and the others. Xiang Yin didn't explain this time. Instead, she looked up at the sky and said, Please wait for a moment, Dao brother. We'll find out soon. Lu Yi followed her gaze, only to see that the already hazy sky had become even more oppressive. Within the crimson haze, rolling thunder flashed, rumbling. It looked like it was going to rain. Following another thunderclap, a drop of rain fell from the sky. Lu Ye's eyes locked onto this drop of rain, and his pupils contracted slightly. The raindrops falling from the sky weren't normal raindrops. Instead, they were suffused with a red substance just like blood. Whoosh, heavy rain fell without warning, and the entire world was filled with a curtain of red rain. Xiang Yin bathed in the rain and glanced at Lu Yi with a wry smile. Dao brother, you should know now why we'll become first-generation blood race members after living here for a long time, right? Lu Yi did indeed know. This was because this rain of blood clearly contained some miraculous holiness. It was similar to the holiness of holy blood, but it was very thin. It was as if a drop of the blood race's holy blood had been diluted into this boundless rain and poured down upon the entire world. In fact, Lu Yi had already sensed something when he was observing from the sidelines. When Xiang Yin and the others activated their blood sea technique, they were all suffused with a holy aura. Of course, this level of holy aura wasn't very strong, which was why they felt completely powerless in the face of Lu Ye's suppression. Even so, it was still a holy aura, something that all blood race members yearned for. This was because only blood race members who had refined holy blood would possess holy aura. Moreover, such blood race members' comprehension of their race's secret techniques was incomparable to that of ordinary blood race members, and they would have a much brighter future. According to Lu Ye's experience, the holy aura that Xiang Yin and the others possessed was almost equivalent to that of a drop of holy blood. This was a very remarkable thing. There were so many blood race members in the cosmos, but the amount of holy blood was limited. It was extremely difficult for ordinary blood race members to obtain holy blood. Now that all four of them possessed holy aura, it was clearly abnormal. Lu Yi was a little puzzled at first, but he didn't think too much about it. Now he understood. The reason for all of this was this rain of blood. This rain of blood had definitely occurred more than once. Xiang Yin and the others could easily refine the extremely weak holy aura while bathing in the rain of blood and improve themselves. Although this kind of refining efficiency wasn't very high, it was undoubtedly much safer than directly refining a drop of holy blood. Lu Yi raised his hand to catch the raindrops and found that he didn't even need to refine them himself. The weak holy aura contained in the raindrops flowed into his body like living creatures, strengthening his own holy aura. Of course, this kind of strengthening was negligible to him, but if this continued for a long time, it would still be a good improvement. Wang Taixing's voice sounded at this time. The rain of blood has enveloped the entire realm, and all the spirit plants and spirit jades born in this realm have been infected. Unless you don't come into contact with the rain of blood or use the spirit plants and spirit jades eradicated in this realm to cultivate, it's only a matter of time before you become like us. Lu Yi heard this and asked, "Are there people in this realm who are different from you?" After witnessing the rain of blood with his own eyes, he thought that all the cultivators who had fallen here were like Xiang Yin and the others, but from Wang Taixing's words, it seemed that this wasn't the case. Wang Taixing nodded and said, "There are. Those guys from the Red Talisman Association are different from us. They are more fortunate." As he spoke, Wang Taixing revealed a wry smile. Red Talisman Association. Lu Ye's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. This name sounded like it was intentionally conveying some kind of message. If he wasn't mistaken, this Red Talisman Association should have been established by Yu Yao, an outsider from the human tribe, sent here by the human tribe. The reason for this name was undoubtedly to provide some guidance to those who came later. Over the years, even if the human tribe didn't send many Yu Yao, there were at least a dozen or so. These pioneers had entered this realm and established this organization. If someone like Lu Yi arrived later and heard about the Red Talisman Association, he would definitely investigate and then join them. Of course, this was only Lu Ye's speculation. Whether this was true or not had yet to be verified. Fortunate? Lu Yi noticed Wang Taixing's strange choice of words and looked at him with an inquiring expression. Wang Taixing said, "When cultivators like us came from the outside world, if we were found by the Red Talisman Association at the first moment and taken away by them, we would be able to avoid being corroded by the rain of blood and be accepted by them. However, if we were unlucky and were corroded by the rain of blood or contaminated with the divine nature through other means, they would definitely not accept us." "Does the Red Talisman Association hate people like you?" Lu Yi asked. "It's not that they hate us. It's just that their resources are limited and they can't support too many people. Moreover, they have always been competing with the Saint Blood Mountain. Even if we sincerely joined them, we wouldn't be of much use. Lu Ye's eyes flashed. Tell me about this Saint Blood Mountain. As a newcomer, he naturally had to gather information. Now, it seemed that his previous speculation was correct. Over the years, many cultivators had accidentally fallen into this realm. However, because this realm was sealed by a layer of barrier, no one who fell into this realm could leave. Naturally, they couldn't send any information to the outside world. As a result, the outside world didn't know that there was a strange realm here. The Red Talisman Association was most likely established by Yu Yao, who was related to the human tribe. Then what was this Saint Blood Mountain? Why was the Red Talisman Association constantly competing with it? Xiang Yin's soft voice sounded. The Saint Blood Mountain is the name of a spiritual mountain. It is also the foundation of one of the two great forces in this realm. If the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association aren't tainted by the Saint Blood Mountain, then anyone who is tainted by the Saint Blood Mountain will have the opportunity to join the Saint Blood Mountain. The Saint Blood Mountain will be happy to accept such cultivators. Lu Yi immediately understood. Whether or not one was tainted by the Saint Blood Mountain was the biggest criterion for the two great forces to recruit people. However, it didn't seem right to say that the two great forces were at odds with each other because of this reason. It was most likely that a mountain couldn't accommodate two tigers. Are you all from the Saint Blood Mountain? Lu Yi asked. Xiang Yin shook her head. No. If we went to join them, the Saint Blood Mountain would definitely accept us. However, we didn't go over because once we joined the Saint Blood Mountain, we would have to compete with the Red Talisman Association. It's very dangerous. However, we won't be able to hold on for much longer. Zhou Ran, who had been silent all this time, suddenly interjected with a bitter expression. Chapter 1783. What do you mean? Lu Yi turned to look at Zhou Ran. Zhou Ran said, the earliest of us to wander here was 300 years ago, and the latest was 100 years ago. So many years have passed and the resources that we brought here have almost been used up. If cultivators don't have resources, how can they maintain their strength? When we encounter them, won't we be at the mercy of others? However, if we want to obtain resources in this realm, we either have to join the Red Talisman Association or rely on the Saint Blood Mountain. Otherwise, we can only find some useful spiritual plants in the wild. After listening to his explanation, Lu Yi finally understood what he meant. If a cultivator didn't have resources, their strength would continue to weaken unless they never used their magic power. However, this was impossible. However, once they used their magic power, they couldn't replenish it. How much could they replenish if they only relied on finding useful spiritual plants in the wild? This was why they fought over Lu Yi. They weren't interested in Lu Yi as a person, but the spiritual jades, spiritual crystals, and spiritual pills that Lu Yi brought in from the outside. Fortunately, they were strong enough and hadn't been in this realm for too long. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. Those cultivators who came to this realm earlier or were not strong enough had no other choice but to rely on the Saint Blood Mountain once they were contaminated with the Blood Clan's divine nature. The rain of blood came and went quickly, stopping in less than an incense stick's worth of time. However, the haze in the sky did not disperse. Just as Lu Yi had seen at the beginning, it seemed that another rain of blood could fall at any time. After pondering for a while, Lu Yi said, "Continue to talk about the Red Talisman Association and the Saint Blood Mountain." In what way? Zhou Ran asked. After interacting with each other, he realized that Lu Yi wasn't a difficult person to serve. Therefore, there was a high chance that his life wouldn't be in danger. He relaxed a lot. In all ways. Lu Yi glanced at him. Zhou Ran knew that he had misspoken, so he straightforwardly told him everything he knew. The others also added on from time to time. As time passed, Lu Yi gradually understood the situation of these two forces. The more he understood, the more worried he became. From his standpoint, he was on the same side as the Red Talisman Association cultivators. After all, they were all related to the dwarf clan. To a certain extent, they could be considered as brothers. However, the Red Talisman Association didn't seem to be in a good situation now. Firstly, in terms of numbers, the Red Talisman Association was at an absolute disadvantage. The number of cultivators at the St. Blood Peak was several times more than the Red Talisman Association. It was only natural that such a situation would occur. The Red Talisman Association only accepted cultivators who had not been tainted by the St. Blood Peak. However, as long as a cultivator came to this region, the chances of not being tainted by the St. Blood Peak was too small. As long as they were tainted by the St. Blood Peak, they would naturally be branded with the mark of the Saint Blood Peak. It had to be said that Yu Yao was not the only cultivator who had accidentally fallen into this world over the years. There were many other constellations as well. Once these constellations entered a place like this, how could they possibly have the ability to protect themselves when faced with so many Yu Yao? They would definitely have found a home long ago, and most of them would have joined Saint Blood Peak. If it was just a difference in numbers, the Red Talisman Association wouldn't be in a difficult situation. After all, the cultivators on the Saint Blood Mountain side were mixed in strength. But the crux of the matter was that there was Rizhao at Sacred Blood Peak. Although Rizhao had only been promoted for a short period of time, he was still Rizhao. The difference of an entire realm was not something Yu Yao could contend against. After that, the Saint Blood Mountain occupied the only spiritual jade vein in this region. Therefore, the cultivators of Saint Blood Peak didn't have to worry about cultivation resources at all. On the other hand, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were like the cultivators of the Three Realms when they first arrived at the Wanxiang Sea. They had to tighten their belts and even avoid fighting as much as possible so that they wouldn't be able to replenish their energy. The Spirit Jade Vein had undoubtedly contributed a lot to Nicho's advancement. In terms of numbers, quality, and resources, the Red Talisman Association was far from being a match for Saint Blood Peak. The reason why they were able to resist until now was because of the Red Talisman Association. Yu Yao, who was sent by the dwarf race, were all accompanied by red talismans. After so many years, these red talismans had been nourished by their blood and qi. It could be said that the power of any red talisman when activated was not inferior to Rizhao's personal attack. Therefore, even though Saint Blood Peak had Rizhao, they were unable to unify the realm. Just like that, the competition between the two sides was in a stalemate. After learning all this information, Lu Ye's heart was somewhat heavy. On one hand, he was worried about his future. On the other hand, he was sad about the Red Talisman Association's situation. As he pondered, Lu Ye said, "You guys are scattered outside. Hasn't Saint Blood Peak thought of taking you in? What about the Red Talisman Association? They haven't thought of getting rid of you guys first. After all, you guys will join Saint Blood Peak sooner or later. Getting rid of you guys is equivalent to eliminating some danger in advance." Xiang Yin laughed bitterly. "Brother, you're a sensible person. However, you've already said that we'll join Saint Blood Peak sooner or later. Why would they be in a hurry to take us in? After all, we're not weak. If they really take us in by force, it'll be difficult for us to submit. As for the Red Talisman Association, they won't easily clash with us unless it's necessary." The reason was that they lacked resources. Fighting consumed magic power and they had to replenish it later. Therefore, even if the Red Talisman Association knew that there were scattered cultivators like Xiang Yin and the others outside, they didn't have the energy to deal with them. They could only let them do as they pleased. Xiang Yin and the others seemed to be independent. However, if they really encountered danger, they would definitely band together to help each other. This was also the reason why the four of them were able to rush over quickly when Lu Yi arrived. Their cave residences weren't far from each other, so they could quickly provide support to others. Lu Yi understood and had a general understanding of the general situation in this realm. "Tell me, have you ever heard of how to leave this domain in the past few years?" He thought that they wouldn't be able to provide any useful clues, but Xiang Yin immediately said, "There's a rumor that as long as the Red Talisman Association and Saint Blood Peak win, the seal of this realm will be broken. At that time we'll be able to enter and leave freely." Lu Yi frowned. Why would the victory of these two forces be related to the seal of this realm? Was there some mystery behind this? Lu Yi couldn't understand. Xiang Yin shook her head. "That's what everyone is saying. As for why, no one knows. However, I heard that it has something to do with the Battle of the Black Abyss." Lu Ye's eyes flashed. The Battle of the Black Abyss? He had once participated in the Battle of the Black Abyss as an external aid of the dwarf race. There was a Battle of the Black Abyss here. Were two Black Abysses the same thing? Whether or not they were the same thing, there must be a connection. Yes. Every 10 years, the Red Talisman Association and Saint Blood Peak will have a Battle of the Black Abyss. At that time, all the cultivators of the two forces will participate. It's said that as long as there's a winner, the situation in the realm will change and the seal will be broken. When was the last Battle of the Black Abyss? It was 9 years ago. Lu Yi raised his brows. This meant that there was still a year until the next Battle of the Black Abyss. However, the realm had been in a sealed state until now. This also meant that the two forces in this realm had yet to decide a winner. The Red Talisman Association was very strong. It wasn't strange when he thought about it. Even if their opponent had Rizhao, as long as Yu Yao with the Red Talisman Association kept Rizhao in check, St. Blood Peak's strongest force wouldn't be able to display its strength. After chatting for a while, Lu Yi learned a lot of information about this realm. However, there were also many things he didn't understand. However, these doubts couldn't be answered by Xiang Yin and the others. A long silence ensued as he pondered. After the time it would take to brew a cup of tea, Lu Yi opened his mouth and asked one last question. "Tell me, where is the Red Talisman Association's base?" Xiang Yin shook her head. "I don't know. The Red Talisman Association's base is extremely secretive. St. Blood Peak has been searching for it for so many years, but unfortunately they haven't found much." After saying this, she was a bit puzzled. Why is Dao brother asking about the Red Talisman Association's base? Logically speaking, shouldn't he be asking about St. Blood Peak's location? After all, Lu Yi was a member of the Blood Tribe. Lu Yi looked at her indifferently and didn't say anything. Xiang Yin's body trembled. She realized that she had spoken out of turn and hurriedly lowered her head. "All right, there's nothing else for you to do." Lu Yi waved his hand. The cultivators glanced at each other. Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing cupped their fists in unison and quickly left. Xiang Yin and Xian Yu also bowed gracefully and returned in the direction they came from. Lu Yi was still sitting upright on the large rock, planning his next steps. First of all, he had to find the Red Talisman Association. Everyone was a family. As long as he could join them, many of his doubts would be answered. Unfortunately, he didn't know where to start looking. He could only take one step at a time. This inner world shouldn't be too big. He should be able to find something if he looked around. In addition, he could also try to make contact with St. Blood Peak. Xiang Yin and the others had mistaken him for a member of the Blood Tribe, so he had a natural advantage. Moreover, compared to the Red Talisman Association, St. Blood Peak was easier to find. "Little sister." A suppressed cry of surprise sounded. Lu Yi looked up and saw Xiang Yin, who had already gone far away, suddenly turn around and fly back to him. She quickly landed in front of him, then took out a jade slip and activated it with her divine sense. Lu Yi didn't disturb her. He simply waited and observed. After a short while, Xiang Yin handed the jade slip to Lu Yi and said, "Brother, this is a rough map of this realm. It might not be very accurate, but please make do with it." Lu Yi accepted it and nodded. "Thank you." Xiang Yin smiled. "It's nothing. There's also something you must remember." "What is it?" Xiang Yin's expression became serious. "Don't seek refuge with St. Blood Peak." Lu Yi's eyes flashed. "What?" Xiang Yin said, "Your holiness is too strong, but your cultivation base isn't high. I once sensed Blazing Heaven's holiness from afar." "That's right, Blazing Heaven is Rizhao from St. Blood Peak. Compared to you, he's like a firefly compared to the bright moon. Your holiness is so strong, but your strength is inferior to his. If you seek refuge with him, I'm afraid you won't be able to return alive." End of chapter. Chapter 1784. If Lu Ye's saint nature was not strong enough, he would naturally not be rejected by St. Blood Peak and would instead be welcomed. However, his saint nature was strong enough, far stronger than even Rizhao Blazing Heaven. Under such circumstances, if he went to seek refuge, how could Blazing Heaven tolerate it? He was the only Rizhao in this domain, and as long as he was not suppressed by his saint nature, he was undoubtedly the strongest. He had also led St. Blood Peak for many years and was in a high position. Such a person would never allow an existence like Lu Yi to stay by his side. Therefore Xiang Yin was right. If he chose to seek refuge with St. Blood Peak, he might not be able to return alive. Her warning was entirely out of good intentions, and Lu Yi thanked her. After the sisters left, Lu Yi divided a part of his attention to examine the jade slip that Xiang Yin had left him. What was imprinted in the jade slip was indeed a rough map of this domain. This was undoubtedly something Lu Yi needed right now. Although it wasn't very valuable, Xiang Yin's actions could be considered a great help to him. As for whether Xiang Yin would do anything to the map, Lu Yi did not care. He did not feel any malice from her, and when he was inquiring about the information just now, Xiang Yin had said the most. After some investigation, Lu Yi had a general understanding of the interior of the inner world. However, he soon noticed a special area on the map. The reason why it was special was not because the area itself was different, but because when Xiang Yin imprinted the map, she made a separate mark on the area. It was a simple mark without any other information. Lu Yi's eyes flashed. This mark was undoubtedly intentional by Xiang Yin. Was she trying to send him some kind of message? But if that was the case, she could have just told him directly. Why did she have to be so secretive? Lu Yi thought for a moment and felt that there might be two reasons for her to do so. First, she herself was not sure whether there were any valuable clues in this area, so she just marked it without giving any opinion. This way she would not have to bear any responsibility. Second, she was guarding against something. But what was she guarding against? When she gave him the map, Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran had already left and only Xianyu was still waiting for him not far away. He couldn't say that she was guarding against her sister. Lu Yi looked carefully at the marked area and could not help but make a guess. This area might very well be the area where the Red Talisman Association's base was located. Because the location of the Saint Blood Mountain was clear on the map, Xiang Yin had specifically warned Lu Yi not to seek refuge with the Saint Blood Mountain. Since he couldn't seek refuge with the Saint Blood Mountain, he could either be like Xiang Yin and the others, wandering around freely, or find a way to join the Red Talisman Association. Lu Yi didn't dare to be certain. From Xiang Yin's point of view, he was a genuine member of the Blood Tribe. The Red Talisman Association wouldn't even accept someone like her who was tainted with sainthood, let alone a member of the Blood Tribe. There was no reason for Xiang Yin to direct her to the Red Talisman Association. However, Lu Yi still decided to search this area. Now that he had entered the inner world, according to Xiang Yin, if he wanted to leave this place, he had to let the Red Talisman Association and the Saint Blood Peak fight it out. Only then would the seal of the domain be broken. No one knew the reason, but since this was the rumor, there must be something going on. If he was really able to find the Red Talisman Association and merge with it, then with the resources of the Red Talisman Association and his own formidable saint attribute, it was very likely that he would be able to win the battle against the Saint Blood Peak. After making up his mind, Lu Yi set off. He didn't dare to be too ostentatious, so he didn't move too quickly. Although the inner world wasn't too big, it was still a world. Lu Yi only arrived at the area 2 days later. He immediately began his search. After several days he didn't find anything. Come to think of it, this was normal. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association wanted to avoid being tainted by the Blood Tribe's saint attribute. However, there would be blood rain in the inner world from time to time. Therefore, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were very likely hiding somewhere. They wouldn't easily show themselves so as to avoid being tainted by the Blood Tribe's saint attribute. If that was the case, then the surface was definitely not their area of activity. This was because the entire inner world would be covered by the blood rain once it fell. If he was a member of the Red Talisman Association, he would definitely choose to move deep underground. Only then would there be a natural defensive barrier and they wouldn't have to worry about being tainted by the blood rain. This place was definitely a holy land that the Blood Tribe yearned for even in their dreams. This was because they didn't need to do anything here. Even if they were to be drenched in the blood rain a few times, the Blood Tribe would still be able to obtain their own saint attribute and it would gradually strengthen. However, for the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association who wanted to avoid being tainted by the Blood Tribe's saint attribute at all costs, the blood rain was like poison. Lu Yi sent out a doppelganger of precious blood to investigate further. Sure enough, he found a few entrances that led underground. Some of them were naturally formed, but most of them had traces of man-made excavation. Unfortunately, when Lu Yi followed these entrances to investigate, he didn't find anything of value. Often, after going deep for a while, he would suddenly discover that the path ahead was blocked and he had no choice but to return the way he came. On this day, Lu Yi once again found an entrance that led deep underground. After exploring it for a while, just like before, the path ahead was suddenly cut off. However, judging from the traces left behind in the last karst cave he passed by, this place should have been inhabited by cultivators. Presumably, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had once stayed here, but they left later on. There shouldn't be any problems with the areas marked by Xiang Yin. Unfortunately, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were too cautious and wouldn't stay in one place for too long. Moreover, there weren't many of them, so it wouldn't be easy for Lu Yi to find them. Just as he was about to leave, Lu Yi suddenly lowered his head and looked at his feet. When he took a step forward, he felt as if he had touched something. Immediately after, alarm bells rang in his head. When he raised his head, he saw that the surrounding walls of the cave were lit up with complicated patterns. Chaotic and violent energy fluctuations began to fluctuate. Lu Yi blinked and instantly understood what was going on. The people of the Red Talisman Association had set up a formation here in advance. If someone barged into this place to investigate, they would definitely trigger the formation here. In such a place and in such an environment, even Yu Yao wouldn't be able to leave in time. Once the formation was triggered, even if they didn't die, they would be seriously injured. This was obviously a surprise that the Red Talisman Association had left for the Saint Blood Mountain. After all, in the eyes of the Red Talisman Association, only the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain would be searching for them. Perhaps there had been cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain who had been so unlucky before. However, Lu Yi had barged in today. Almost at the same time that he understood everything, the dark karst cave was filled with light, and his figure was submerged in it. About 100 miles away, a figure stood quietly and looked in this direction from afar. A buzzing sound came from the depths of the ground, as if a ferocious giant beast had flipped over underground. The ground trembled and huge ravines suddenly appeared. A moment later all the chaos subsided. There were no traces of living beings in that direction. Only then did the cultivator turn around and prepare to leave. However, just as he was about to move, he suddenly paused. It was because a figure in front of him was rapidly rushing in his direction. The cultivator used his full strength to look and couldn't help but be slightly startled because the person who came looked very unfamiliar. He had never seen him before. One had to know that although cultivators would occasionally fall into the inner world, there were actually not many of them. Sometimes one wouldn't see a stranger for 10 or 20 years. It could be said that everyone knew how many cultivators there were in the inner world and what kind of people they were. At this time, the sudden appearance of an unfamiliar face was somewhat thought-provoking. He couldn't help but recall the turmoil in this world a few days ago. It was undoubtedly a sign that a newcomer had arrived. Naturally, the newcomer was Lu Yi. As early as when he was in the 9 provinces, Lu Yi had a habit of leaving behind a means of escape before going deep into some semi-enclosed environments. He could construct void spirit runes at any time, so as long as the space he was in was not completely enclosed, he could basically escape in time when he encountered danger. Moreover, in order to find this area more conveniently, Lu Yi had also sent out one of his clones to help. With the help of the clone's positioning and the construction of void spirit runes, he could protect himself. Moreover, the moment before the formation exploded, Lu Yi noticed that it should be a remote control type. In other words, someone nearby was controlling the explosion of the formation. Therefore, after Lu Yi escaped from the depths of the underground, he immediately followed the traces and found his way here. Sure enough, someone was here. The distance between them quickly shortened. After a while, Lu Yi stopped not far in front of the other party and looked up. This was a man from the monster race. There were a few traces of beast stripes on his left and right cheeks. His eyes were purple and looked a little strange. After looking at each other, Lu Yi cupped his fists. Lu Yi of the Jade Conch greets Dao brother. The purple-eyed man was secretly on guard. However, when he saw Lu Ye's harmless appearance, he still nodded. Hu De Quan. Lu Yi did not waste his breath. If he wanted to join the Red Talisman Association, he had to prove his position. The Red Talisman Association was undoubtedly the best pass. Therefore he raised his finger. Under the power of the Red Talisman, a red light flashed on his fingertip. When Hu De Quan, who was secretly on guard, saw this, he was surprised and delighted. Dao brother, you were sent by Mount Fangsuan? He felt a familiar aura from the red light. Lu Yi nodded. Yes. Hu De Quan was obviously excited. That's great. In that case, the one who fell into this world a few days ago was you, Dao brother? Lu Yi nodded again. Good news, good news. Hu De Quan was very excited. The humanoid race had not sent Yu Yao over for a long time. The Red Talisman Association's strength was declining day by day. On the other hand, the Saint Blood Mountain was constantly growing stronger. If this continued, the Red Talisman Association would definitely be in a worse situation. When they reached their limit, the Red Talisman Association would probably collapse without the Saint Blood Mountain doing anything. End of this chapter. Chapter 1785. Especially recently, because the next battle of Black Abyss was getting closer and closer, the pressure on the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association was also increasing. Lu Ye's sudden appearance at this time undoubtedly boosted the morale of the Red Talisman Association, because Lu Ye's appearance let them know that Mount Minuscule hadn't given up on them. Morale was an illusory thing, but sometimes it played a very important role. Lu Ye's arrival was Mount Minuscule's attitude. Hu De Quan immediately understood that Mount Minuscule was still working hard, and the cultivators sent here before weren't without support. Which Mount Minuscule is fellow Taoist from? Hu De Quan asked. And who is your Taoist companion? Although Lu Ye's red talisman power gave him a very familiar and intimate feeling, there were still some things that he had to clarify. The East, Lu Yi replied. My Taoist companion. Su Yuqing. Oh. Hu De Quan was stunned for a moment, almost thinking that he had misheard. Lu Yi repeated his words. Hu Dequan's expression became strange. He looked Lu Yi up and down for a while, then said hesitantly, "Fellow Taoist, you can't joke about this." He naturally knew about Su Yuqing. She was one of the three great sunshine of the East. Lu Yi was only at the middle stage of the Moon Jade realm, so how could he be her Taoist companion? Of course I'm not joking. Lu Ye's expression was solemn. Hu Dequan was a bit confused. He instinctively didn't want to believe it, but he also knew that Lu Yi wouldn't joke about this. But if so, he was actually also sent here by Mount Minuscule. His Taoist companion was a female cultivator from the Cloud Sea Peak, Qin Xuanhai's disciple. Qin Xuanhai and Su Yuqing were on the same level, and he had to call Su Yuqing martial uncle, like his Taoist companion. If Lu Yi was really Su Yuqing's Taoist companion, then didn't that mean this young man in front of him whose cultivation level was lower than his was also a martial uncle? Fellow Taoist, you're really admirable. Hu Dequan held back for a long time, unable to express his complicated feelings. It was hard to imagine that someone like Su Yuqing would actually choose such a young man as her Taoist companion. As for the words martial uncle, he absolutely couldn't say it out loud, and he definitely wouldn't mention his Taoist companion to Lu Yi. Hu Dequan coughed lightly and changed the topic. Fellow Taoist, did you come here specifically to look for us? Lu Yi nodded and said, someone told me that there are two great powers in this realm. One of them is the Red Talisman Association. I guess that they were created by our own people, so I came over to try my luck. Indeed. Hu Dequan called out, fellow Taoist, please follow me. I will bring you to meet the others. If they know that you are here, they will definitely be very happy. Martial Ant, I can't be the only one who suffers a loss. It's only fair if everyone suffers a loss together. Hu Dequan could already imagine the expressions of those guys when they heard that Su Yuqing's Dao companion had come here. Because he had to guard against the sneak attacks of the Saint Blood Peak cultivators at all times, Hu Dequan suppressed his magic power fluctuations as much as possible as he moved forward. Along the way he asked, fellow Taoist, you haven't been tainted by the blood rain, have you? No. Lu Yi had already found out about the Red Talisman Association's attitude towards recruiting members from Xiangyin, so he naturally knew how to answer at this time. Moreover, he was different from Xiangyin and the others. As long as he didn't activate the blood race's secret technique, he would be no different from an ordinary human. Xiangyin and the others were different. Even if they didn't activate the blood race's secret technique and didn't look like anything on the surface, if Lu Yi activated his divine nature, they would still be suppressed because they already had the characteristics of the blood race inside them. That's good. Hu Dequan heaved a sigh of relief. It wasn't that he really trusted Lu Yi that much. The main thing was that Lu Yi had only been here for a few days, so the chances of him being tainted by the blood rain were not high. The divine nature contained in the blood rain is pervasive. If you are tainted by it, you will be in big trouble. They chatted as they walked. After half a day, the two of them arrived at an underground karst cave. Lu Yi looked around and found that this place seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. There were no traces of life. He looked at Hu Dequan in confusion. The latter explained, fellow Taoist, please wait here with me for a moment. Fellow Taoist Meng Su and fellow Taoist Yang Ling will be here soon. Lu Yi had also noticed that Hu Dequan had used a sound talisman to send out a message on the way here. Meng Su and Yang Ling should have been called over by him to meet up here. Lu Yi looked around the karst cave and blinked. He nodded and said, okay. With that, he found a place and sat down cross-legged. After waiting for a while, footsteps came from outside, followed by a loud voice. More brothers? Another voice followed, be quiet. Be careful not to attract the enemy. The loud voice snorted. I'm already hiding here. If I can still attract them here, I'll wring my head off. As he spoke, two men walked in from outside. One was fat and the other was thin. Their gazes swept over the familiar Hu Dequan and landed on Lu Yi. Their eyes lit up as if they had seen a treasure. Hu Dequan stood up and introduced them to each other. Brother Meng, Brother Yang, fellow Taoist Lu Yi is from the east. He then introduced the two to Lu Yi. The fat one was the loud voice Yang Ling and the thin one was Meng Su. Including Hu Dequan, the three of them were at the late-stage Moon Jade realm. After all, they were sent by the human tribe to search for the core of Mount Fangsuan. Their strength was definitely not low. This time, if not for Lu Ye's insistence, Su Yuqing also wanted to wait for him to reach the late-stage Moon Jade realm before asking him to help with the search. Yang Ling laughed. We're family. I was also sent from the east. Who's your Dao partner? I stayed at Mount Fangsuan for a while. Maybe we know each other. Hu Dequan snickered at the side. When Lu Yi said Su Yuqing's name, Yang Ling's expression suddenly stiffened. He turned to look at Hu Dequan with an expression that said, "Is this kid joking with me?" Hu Dequan shrugged. When he heard this news, his reaction was no better than Yang Ling's. Meng Su also realized the seriousness of the problem. They used to call each other brothers here and were happy and carefree. Who could stand the sudden appearance of an uncle master? Meng Su didn't even bother to say which Mount Fangsuan had sent him here. He was afraid that he would make trouble for himself. After a moment of awkwardness, Yang Ling scratched his head. Forget it. No matter where you're from, we're all brothers here. That's right. Hu Dequan and Meng Su agreed. Yang Ling's expression turned solemn. Brother Lu, although some things are basically confirmed, there are still some procedures to go through in order to join the Red Talisman Association. Please don't mind. Lu Yi nodded. No problem. What do we do? He was mentally prepared for this. He knew that joining the Red Talisman Association wasn't that simple. If it were that simple, the Red Talisman Association wouldn't be so pure after so many years. First, please use your Red Talisman, Yang Ling said. Although Hu Dequan had felt the power of Lu Ye's Red Talisman, Yang Ling and Meng Su hadn't seen it before. Lu Yi immediately activated the Red Talisman's power and let Yang Ling and Meng Su feel it. After a moment, both of them nodded, indicating that there was no problem. Yang Ling spoke again. Brother Meng, I still want to test whether you've been tainted by the divine nature. If not, you'll be a member of the Red Talisman Association from now on. Following his words, Meng Su suddenly took out a ball-like object and tossed it to Lu Yi. This is something I've painstakingly refined for many years. I'll have to trouble Brother Lu to drip some blood on it. Lu Yi looked at the ball-like object in his hand and nodded. No problem. He had some doubts before. How did the Red Talisman Association determine whether a cultivator had been tainted by the divine nature? Now he finally understood that there was a special treasure here. The Red Talisman Association had been fighting with the Sacred Blood Mountain in the inner world for so many years, so they naturally had some methods of their own. He didn't know what the result of using this object would be. Although the talent tree had burned away everything that was disadvantageous to him when he was refining the sacred blood, and he wasn't affected during normal days, he still refined some things that belonged to the blood race. Normal methods wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities, but Lu Yi couldn't determine what the result would be if he dripped his blood on it. Actually, when Hu Dequan brought him here, he already had some guesses. If Hu Dequan really trusted him completely, he should be in the Red Talisman Association stronghold right now, and not here. Hu Dequan had obviously taken precautions to bring him here. In such an environment, with 3 late-stage Yu Yao cultivators gathered together, it would be very difficult for Lu Yi to escape if something went wrong with his test. Lu Yi even suspected that Yang Ling and Meng Su had set up a trap at the entrance. But no matter what, he couldn't avoid this test. If he could successfully join the Red Talisman Association, it would greatly increase their ability to resist the Sacred Blood Mountain. As for confessing in advance, it probably wouldn't work. The Red Talisman Association's standards for recruiting members were clear. If he confessed, the only result would be being excluded. So he could only take a gamble. He drew his mountain pan saber and lightly cut his hand, dripping his blood on the ball-like treasure. Yang Ling's voice rang out. Don't be too nervous. Brother Hu said that you've only been here for a few days. As long as you haven't come into contact with the blood rain, there won't be any problems. As soon as he finished speaking, the originally pitch-black ball suddenly glowed brighter and brighter, until the entire cave was dyed red. Lu Yi looked up and saw Yang Ling's expression become extremely solemn. He saw Meng Su's regretful and pained expression, and he also sensed Hu Dequan's clear hostility behind him. He didn't know when the 3 Yu Yao cultivators had separated into 3 sides, surrounding him in the middle. Lu Yi sighed. He raised his hand and tossed the ball-like treasure to Yang Ling. He said, "Can the 3 of you allow me to explain?" Yang Ling's expression was grave. "There's no need to explain. I also know that you didn't intend to be tainted by the divine nature. It's just that the blood rain is pervasive, and you don't know anything about it since you've just arrived." At this point he couldn't help but curse. "We were too slow. My friend, if you really want to blame someone, you can only blame us. If they were well-informed enough and had acted quickly enough, they could have found Lu Yi as soon as he arrived. This situation could have been avoided." End of chapter. Chapter 1786. My friend, do you have any last words? Yang Ling asked as he secretly activated his magic power. He understood that the young man in front of him must have been drenched in the blood rain after coming to this world. However, there was one thing that puzzled him. The red light from the test just now seemed to be a little too dazzling. In the past, they had used this method to determine if a new cultivator had been tainted by the blood tribe's divine nature. However, it had never been as bright as it was today. He probably hadn't been drenched in the blood rain, but had taken a bath in the blood rain. Yang Ling felt extremely regretful. It wasn't easy to find a natural companion, but now they had to fight. This wasn't the first time they had experienced something like this. Is there no room for negotiation? Lu Yi asked. In such a situation he still wanted to try. Hu Dequan, who had led him here, sighed. Little brother, let me tell you a story. I'm all ears. Lu Yi nodded. Hu Dequan said, initially the Red Talisman Association's recruitment criteria weren't so strict. As long as it was someone from Mount Innerheart or someone who shared the same ideals as us, we were willing to accept them. We were once powerful for a period of time. However, as time passed, various unforeseen events occurred internally. Many of those who were tainted by the holy aura became traitors, including those sent by Mount Innerheart. Do you know why? Before Lu Yi could answer, Hu Dequan gave his own answer. The resources brought in from the outside world were limited. When one's resources were exhausted, the energy consumed couldn't be replenished. The pain of a person's cultivation weakening day by day was something that few could endure. Under such pain and torture, their firm beliefs in the past began to waver. Joining Mount Fangsuan was their only choice. Meng Su, who had been silent all this while, said with a pained heart, we were once betrayed. Once bitten, twice shy. Brother Lu, this isn't your fault. In the end, we didn't do enough. Yang Ling took a step forward. So even if you have complaints in your heart, we can't let you leave. Because once you leave, you'll join Mount Fangsuan sooner or later and become our enemy. Lu Yi nodded. He understood what they were thinking. He didn't try to explain anything because he couldn't explain the current situation at all. Especially when Yang Ling and the others had a preconceived notion. In their view, any cultivator who was tainted by the divine nature was not one of them. This was an iron law that could not be broken. Since they weren't on the same side and would become enemies sooner or later, they naturally had to strike first to gain the upper hand. They didn't attack Xiangyin and the others because they weren't weak. If they deliberately went to them, it would only force them to join St. Blood Peak earlier. On the other hand, Lu Yi had taken the initiative to deliver himself to the door, so there was no way he could let him go. Say your last words. Yang Ling shouted loudly, if we are able to escape from this place one day, we will definitely report everything that happened today to Peak Master Su. There will definitely not be a single word of falsehood. Lu Yi glanced at him and smiled. I believe in you. As he spoke, he took off a storage ring and tossed it to Yang Ling. Yang Ling didn't take it and instead dodged it. He was obviously afraid that someone would tamper with his ring. Lu Yi didn't mind and only said, time will prove everything. I hope that there will be a day when I can fight side by side with all of you. Yang Ling frowned. He obviously felt that Lu Yi was a little stubborn. Just as he was about to say something, Lu Yi's magic power suddenly surged and a spirit inscription quickly formed under his feet. Attack. Meng Su also realized that something was wrong and immediately shouted. In the next moment, the three of them attacked together, their violent power surging towards Lu Yi. However, before their attacks could reach him, Lu Yi's figure suddenly disappeared into thin air. The surging magic power calmed down. Yang Ling looked puzzled and then turned to Meng Su. What kind of method is this? Meng Su frowned. It seems to be a space formation. Did he set something up here in advance? As he spoke, he looked at Hu Dequan, who led Lu Yi here. Hu Dequan was dumbfounded. I didn't see him do anything. While waiting for Yang Ling and Meng Su, he seemed to be chatting casually with Lu Yi, but in fact he had been secretly monitoring him. If Lu Yi had set something up here in advance, there was no way he wouldn't know. While speaking, Hu Dequan suddenly remembered something. Before I met him, he had entered a trap I had set up. I activated the spirit array in the trap from afar, thinking that I could kill him, but who would have thought that he would appear in front of me safe and sound? Meng Su immediately understood. He has a teleportation technique. Other than that, there was no other explanation. However, even the three of them couldn't see through the mysteries of the teleportation technique. Can you find out where he went? Yang Ling asked. It's too late. Hu Dequan shook his head. He can't still be in the same place. I'm afraid he's already far away. Yang Ling couldn't help but sigh. Today's matter wasn't finished, and they would probably have another enemy in the future. Meng Su turned his head and looked to the side. He reached out and grabbed the storage ring left behind by Lu Yi. After a brief inspection he was surprised. He left a lot of spiritual jades. This was undoubtedly left behind by Lu Yi after he heard that they were lacking in resources. Hu Dequan was silent for a while before he said, "This little brother is actually a good person." Even when they turned hostile and wanted to kill him, Lu Yi didn't show too much emotion. Yang Ling didn't even sense any resentment from Lu Yi. Yang Ling said coldly, "A person's heart changes. You think he's good now, but when his resources dry up and his cultivation weakens in the future, you'll see what he chooses to do." Hu Dequan fell silent. They'd experienced such things before and they'd even wavered because of it. "Let's go. There's already a commotion here. We can't stay here for long." Yang Ling walked out as he spoke. 3,000 miles away, Lu Ye's figure flashed. After coming into contact with Hu Dequan and the others, he realized that his previous plan had failed. With his current situation, it was impossible for the Red Talisman Association to accept him. He understood the cautiousness of Hu Dequan and the others, and he also agreed with their decisiveness. Because if he was in their shoes he would do the same. However, he had no way to prove that he was different from the other first-generation Blood Clan members. Some things couldn't be said with words. He could only prove it with his actions. At present, he didn't have a comprehensive understanding of this world, so he had to find someone to learn more about it. Moreover, he still had a question in his heart that he wanted to solve. Shui, Peak, a spiritual peak with an elegant name. However, there was no snow on this peak, so the name didn't quite live up to its name. The main reason was that he thought the two women of the Snow Clan lived here. The spiritual peak they'd lived in back in the Snow Clan's homeland was called Shui, Peak, so they'd changed their name after coming here. Xiang Yin and Xian Yu had benefited from the blood rain, so they returned to Shui, Peak after parting ways with Lu Yi. They cultivated in seclusion to refine the holy nature that had invaded their bodies. Hu Dequan and the others tried their best to avoid being contaminated by the blood rain, viewing it as a scourge. However, to Xiang Yin and the others, the blood rain could provide them with assistance. Suddenly Yu Yao's aura descended from the sky. The two women were alarmed when they sensed this familiar aura. They hurried out of their seclusion and looked up. He looked up and saw that it was indeed Lu Yi. "Greetings, Taoist brother." Xiang Yin hurriedly bowed, her expression somewhat reserved. Lu Yi had undoubtedly left a deep impression on her during the past few days. Xian Yu also bowed, her temperament still as cold as ice. Lu Yi took a deep look at Xiang Yin and said, "I'm new here and have nowhere to go, so I'd like to stay here for a while. You don't mind, do you?" Xiang Yin forced a smile. "We don't mind. If Taoist brother is willing, you can stay here for as long as you want." She cursed in her heart. "You're already here. Even if we do mind, do we dare to say it out loud?" Lu Yi nodded. "Arrange a place for me to stay." Xiang Yin looked around and said, "Taoist brother, you can stay in my building. I'll stay with my sister." "All right." Lu Yi didn't have many requirements for a place to stay, so he walked toward a nearby wooden house. Xiang Yin pursed her red lips and suddenly asked, "Taoist brother, how was your trip this time?" Lu Yi stood still and tilted his head to look at her. "I didn't gain much." Xiang Yin nodded. "Then I might have made a mistake." About 10 days after arriving in the core world, Lu Yi settled down at Tingshui Peak. Originally, the Xiangyin and Xuanyu sisters were a little worried that Lu Yi would make unreasonable demands of them. If that was the case, then with the strength of Lu Ye's holy nature, the sisters would only be docile and obedient. They would be reduced to playthings with no other choice. But what reassured the sisters was that Lu Yi didn't even show his face after coming here. He stayed in his room all day long and they didn't know what he was doing. About 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Xiang Yin suddenly came to Lu Ye's room and called out softly, "Taoist brother." Lu Ye's voice soon came from inside the room. "Come in." Xiang Yin pushed the door open and entered. She immediately saw Lu Yi sitting cross-legged on the bed that originally belonged to her. "You seem to be cultivating. I hope I didn't disturb you, Taoist brother?" Xiang Yin revealed an obedient and sweet smile. Coupled with her soft voice, she vividly displayed the beauty of a woman. Lu Yi glanced at her indifferently. Xiang Yin said, "Taoist brother, we might be away for a few days." Lu Yi nodded. "Understood." Xiang Yin was a little stunned. "Taoist brother, aren't you going to ask where we're going?" Lu Ye's reaction was a little different from what she had expected. Lu Yi finally asked, "Where are we going?" Xiang Yin explained, "Since Taoist brother came from the outside, you must have experienced the demonic eye blink. In a day or two the demonic eye should blink. When she said this, Lu Yi, who was originally disinterested, immediately perked up. The demonic eye blink? Lu Yi was very interested in the demonic eye blink and the blood eye spirit tattoo that was imprinted on his divine sea. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time in the inner world of wonders and had only glimpsed a small part of the spirit tattoo. This was undoubtedly a pity. He had originally planned to wait until he had the opportunity to go out and see the spirit tattoo in its entirety, but he didn't expect Xiang Yin to mention this. Chapter 1787. Xiang Yin's words gave Lu Yi an exciting idea. Is there also a demonic eye blink in this realm? Xiang Yin replied, there is. According to our speculations, the source of the demonic eye blink is in this realm. What do you mean? Lu Yi straightened his posture. He felt like he had made the right choice by coming back to find Xiang Yin and her sister. He had inadvertently stumbled upon an important piece of information. Xiang Yin sorted out her words before saying, Dao brother, you should have experienced the demonic eye blink in the outside world, so you should know what kind of effect it would have on cultivators. Since there's an effect, it must be an extension of some kind of power that we can't understand. In other words, the crimson eye imprinted in the divine sea is the manifestation of some kind of powerful force. Lu Yi nodded. This explanation was quite reasonable. He gestured to her and said, continue. This powerful force can't appear for no reason. There has to be a source. If I'm not mistaken, this source is in this realm. Because of this, when the demonic eye blink, the crimson eye is like a crimson moon that hangs in the sky for a long time without dissipating. Lu Yi understood. So when the demonic eye blink, not only would the divine spectacle outside be affected, but it would also affect the inside of this realm? However, the changes were different. If a cultivator were to enter the spectacle, they would experience the same thing as what happened to Lu Yi earlier. The blood eye imprint in their divine sea would affect their temperament, causing them to go berserk and become easily angered. However, if a cultivator was in this realm, the crimson eye imprint wouldn't appear in their divine sea. Instead, a crimson moon would appear in the sky. From the looks of it, when the demonic eye blink, it would affect both the inside and outside of this realm. Xiang Yin's speculation should be correct. The source of this mysterious power was in this realm. Lu Yi suddenly recalled a speculation he had made before. His inner world had been contaminated by the blood ancestors' holy blood. In that case, the source of the demonic eye blink was most likely the blood ancestors' holy blood. It could even be said that the rain of blood falling from the sky was related to the blood ancestors' holy blood. Otherwise, how could first-generation blood tribe cultivators like Xiang Yin and the others be born? Many things suddenly became clear. Could the magic eye of blood have been born because of the blood ancestors' holy blood? Lu Yi suddenly had a bold conjecture. Xiang Yin continued, so every time the demonic eye blinks, we'll be greatly affected. We won't recognize anyone and will become aggressive. Every time that happens, we sisters have to find a place to hide and avoid killing each other. Lu Yi finally understood why the two sisters had to go out for a few days. Obviously, they had experienced this more than once, so they had prepared a plan in advance. How do you know when Mag-Iris will blink? Lu Yi asked. If he could figure this out, it would undoubtedly be of great help to him in prying into the Blood Eye Spirit inscriptions. Xiang Yin pursed her lips into a smile. You've been in seclusion ever since you came here, so you naturally can't see the changes in the outside world. If you go out and take a look, you'll know. The haze in the sky is weakening, and the blood moon is showing signs of appearing. When the haze disappears, the demonic eye will blink and the blood moon will appear in the sky. Lu Yi hurriedly got up upon hearing this and walked out of the wooden house to look up at the sky. Sure enough, the thick haze was different from what he had observed a few days ago. It had become very thin, as if it would dissipate at any moment. Beyond the thin haze, there was a faint trace of blood light, as if the blood eye had narrowed into a slit. Lu Yi was secretly delighted, but he didn't show it on his face. The demonic eye would also blink in this world, and the blood eye would appear in the form of a blood moon in the sky. This would undoubtedly make it easier for him to pry into its mysteries, and he wouldn't have to worry about the rainbow divine lotus destroying the blood eye imprinted on his divine sea. It was just that he didn't know whether the blood eye here was the same as the one that had illuminated his divine sea. He would have to wait until the time came to find out. He didn't refuse Xiang Yin's request. She had already prepared a self-preservation plan for so many years, so he allowed her to do as she pleased. However, before leaving, Xiang Yin thoughtfully reminded him, "Brother, we sisters know a little about formations, so we've set up some inside listening snow peak. During this time you can hide inside. After saying that, she also gave him the jade pendant for the formation. After the sisters left, Lu Yi didn't intend to hide. Instead, he waited outside the wooden house. Hundreds of miles away, Xianyu followed behind Xiang Yin in a hurry. She held back for a long time before asking, "What are you doing?" She had no idea what Xiang Yin wanted to do, nor did she know why she was suddenly brought out. Before leaving, Xiang Yin had specifically told her not to ask anything and just to listen to her. Out of trust for her sister, Xianyu didn't ask much until now. "Sister, don't worry. You'll find out soon." Xiang Yin grabbed Xianyu's hand. Xianyu was about to speak when her expression suddenly froze. She turned to look in a certain direction. "Who is it?" On listening Snow Peak, Lu Yi sat on a chair and looked up at the sky with anticipation. A day after Xiang Yin and her sister had left, the dark red light suddenly expanded. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. In the blink of an eye, a blood moon appeared in the sky, illuminating the entire world in crimson. Lu Yi immediately activated the Insight Spirit inscriptions in his eyes and focused on the blood moon. Soon, a look of joy appeared on his face. This was because this blood moon was no different from the blood eye that was imprinted in his divine sea back then. It was densely covered with complicated patterns. It was the manifestation of an extremely profound spirit pattern. He hurriedly focused on it and memorized the outlines of yin and yang. Time silently passed by as he immersed himself in his thoughts. However, what puzzled Lu Yi was that his current state was different from what Xiang Yin had described. It was also different from when he was inside the spectacle. When the crimson eye shone on his divine sea, his temperament was greatly affected. It was only because he had the soul-steadying bell and the rainbow divine lotus that he wasn't affected by the sudden change in his emotions. Otherwise, he would have become bloodthirsty and violent like the Wing tribe member. However, there were no such signs right now. Instead, bathed in the light of the blood moon, he felt as if he was a fish that had returned to the water. He even felt that if he used the blood tribe's secret arts in this state, their power would increase. This wasn't an illusion. It was his truest feeling. This clearly wasn't because he was special. When he was inside the spectacle, his experience was no different from other cultivators. He was only safe because he had a unique and powerful resistance method. Now that he was in this world, logically speaking, he shouldn't be any different from other cultivators. In other words, if what Xiang Yin had said was true, then he should have experienced the same feeling as before when the blood moon shone in the sky. But in reality he hadn't. There was only one explanation. Xiang Yin was lying. It seemed that after separating from Hu Dequan and the others, he had an answer to the question he had before coming here. The truth should be that in the blink of an eye, the cultivators inside and outside the spectacle felt completely different. In the core world, cultivators like Xiang Yin and the others who were tainted with the divine nature would have their strength increased when they bathed in the blood moon. As for Hu Dequan and the others who weren't tainted by the divine nature, Lu Yi didn't know how they would react because he couldn't find out. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Suddenly, Lu Yi turned his head and looked in a certain direction. There was a suppressed magic power fluctuation coming from that direction. It was very far away from him. Although he didn't know what method the other party used to conceal it, the magic power fluctuation was too strong and the concealment wasn't complete enough. It was only because he was outside looking at the blood moon that he could feel the magic power fluctuation. If he had really listened to Xiang Yin and entered the great array inside Snow Listening Peak, he wouldn't have been able to sense it. This woman's words were soft and gentle, and her smile was sweet and beautiful, but her heart was extremely vicious. The key was that Lu Yi didn't know what he had done to provoke her. After coming to this world, he didn't have any direct conflicts or grievances with Xiang Yin. It could even be said that he didn't kill Xiang Yin. The magic power fluctuation in the distance suddenly became incomparably violent. The strong power was even comparable to Rizhao's attack. However, Lu Yi was sure that it wasn't Rizhao who had attacked because the magic power fluctuation hadn't reached that level at the beginning. Moreover, there was only one Rizhao in this world, and that was St. Blood Mountain's blazing heaven. He wouldn't have come to this place personally. It wasn't Hikari who did it, but in such a short period of time, he was able to summon a power comparable to Hikari. The person who had attacked had activated the red talisman. Moreover, the person who had attacked had a certain degree of understanding of him, so they chose to attack from a distance and didn't dare to meet him face to face. If it was a cultivator from the Red Talisman Association, they wouldn't have done so. They did want to kill him, but it wasn't to the extent that they didn't dare to meet him face to face. After all, the The Red Talisman Association only treated him as a mid-stage moon jade. There was no reason for them to activate something as precious as the Red Talisman to kill him. The Red Talisman was an important bargaining chip in their fight against Saint Blood Mountain. They wouldn't use it unless they had no other choice. They were afraid of him, but they had used the Red Talisman regardless of the cost. Lu Yi could only think of one possibility: they had betrayed the Red Talisman Association and joined Saint Blood Mountain. The situation became clearer and clearer, and it also confirmed the doubts in his heart. While he was thinking, the Red Talisman's power had been activated to its limit. On Snow Listening Peak, Lu Ye's vision was instantly filled with a dark red light. Within the dark red light, a huge spear that was several hundred feet long pierced through the air and arrived at Snow Listening Peak in the blink of an eye. It directly crashed into this not-so-tall mountain peak. Incomparably violent energy swept out, and Snow Listening Peak began to melt from the point of impact. In the blink of an eye, the entire Spirit Mountain was enveloped in red light. The red light slowly dissipated, and the several hundred feet tall Snow Listening Peak was completely flattened. Chapter 1788. 300 kilometers away from Snow Listening Peak, 3 figures stood tall. 2 of them were Xiang Yin and her sister. Xian Yu's body trembled slightly. Although she had long heard of the terrifying power of the Red Talisman produced by the lesser humans, this was the first time she had seen it with her own eyes. In front of such a terrifying power, even a late-stage moon jade cultivator seemed extremely weak. Xiang Yin's face flickered under the light of the blood moon. A trace of shame flashed through her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by determination. In such a place and in such an environment, her actions were all for the sake of survival. It had nothing to do with personal grudges. Besides, she had no grudges with Lu Yi. Standing in front of the 2 sisters was a man in a blood-red robe. His face was covered and his face couldn't be seen clearly. Xian Yu had seen this person when she had followed Xiang Yin here. Although she didn't recognize this person, his attire undoubtedly revealed his identity: a cultivator from Saint Blood Mountain. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary cultivator from Saint Blood Mountain. He had once betrayed the Red Talisman Association and turned to Saint Blood Mountain. The Red Talisman he had just activated was something that the lesser humans had once bestowed upon them. Meng Su had told Lu Yi that they had been betrayed before. Those who had betrayed them weren't just those with weak minds. There were also cultivators who had once been considered brothers by them. They had been tested by the lesser humans for many years before coming here and were trusted by the lesser humans. Wu Duquan was right. The resources brought in from the outside were limited. When one's own resources were used up, there was no way to replenish the energy they had expended. Many people couldn't bear the pleasure of having their cultivation weaken day by day. The only spirit jade mine in this realm was controlled by Saint Blood Mountain. If they wanted to obtain resources, they could only rely on them. It was precisely because of these many years of bitter experience that Hu Dequan and the others had decided to kill Lu Yi after learning that he had been tainted by the divine essence. There was a historical reason for this. You've done well. Follow me back to the mountain. The sacred sovereign will reward you, the red-robed cultivator said slowly. His aura was very weak. Even though he was a late-stage moon jade cultivator, activating a red talisman with all his strength consumed an enormous amount of energy. Especially since this red talisman had been nourished in his body for nearly 1,000 years. However, in order to kill Lu Yi in a single strike, he didn't dare hold back. According to Xiang Yin's information as well as the information he obtained from the 2 loose cultivators nearby, this newcomer possessed a terrifying level of holiness. It was a level that even holy sages couldn't reach. It was precisely because of this that Saint Venerable Blazing Sky had spared no expense to send him to deal with this matter using the red talisman. Otherwise, how could a strategic weapon like the red talisman be used so easily? If it weren't for the fact that Blazing Heaven was wary of the other party's divine nature, wouldn't it be safer for him to personally take action? Now that the entire Snowhere Peak had been razed to the ground, all of the Mid-Moon Jade Realm cultivators who had been trapped there were dead. Thank you, Taoist brother. Thank you, Lord. Xiang Yin pursed her dry red lips. She didn't look too happy. I need to recover for a while. Stand guard for me, the red-robed cultivator ordered, then sat down cross-legged. However, at that moment he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and saw a figure leisurely flying towards him from that direction. The figure looked unfamiliar. It was a young man with a long saber hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was a weapon cultivator. His magic power fluctuations weren't too strong either. He was only a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator. In this world, a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator was nothing. After all, there were plenty of late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivators in this damned place. The red-robed cultivator was slightly stunned. He didn't know who this newcomer was. However, Xiang Yin, who was beside him, cried out in alarm. Her voice was filled with disbelief and fear. Then the red-robed cultivator heard Xiang Yin shout urgently, "Big sister, run!" As his magic power fluctuated, Xiang Yin and her sister's robes fluttered in the wind. They fled into the distance as if they had encountered some dreadful monster. Unfortunately, they couldn't escape. Several rivers of blood formed by the precious blood swept over from all directions. As Lu Ye's figure approached, they surrounded the place. Xiang Yin still wanted to struggle, but the rivers of blood suddenly swelled and merged into one, forming a huge ball of blood that tightly surrounded the entire area. The center of the blood ball was bloodless. Xiang Yin and her sister's faces were also bloodless. After realizing that they couldn't escape, the two sisters had no choice but to land. They looked at Lu Yi, who was standing not far away, in horror. Xiang Yin's body trembled. She clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't understand how Lu Yi, who was only a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator, had managed to escape the might of the Red Talisman. Moreover, from the looks of it, he hadn't been affected by the power of the Red Talisman. The red-robed cultivator didn't know who Lu Yi was, but after seeing Xiang Yin and her sister's reaction, he immediately had a guess. Looking at Lu Yi, who was standing not far away, a trace of shame flashed through the red-robed cultivator's eyes. Originally, he could have stood on the same side as Lu Yi and called him a brother. Unfortunately, they had met in such a terrible way. "Which sect are you from?" he asked, a trace of calmness appearing on his face. If this newcomer's divine nature was as terrifying as he thought, then even if his cultivation was a minor realm higher than Lu Ye's, he would still be a fish on a chopping board. There was no point in resisting. Not to mention he had consumed a great deal of energy and his strength had been greatly reduced. For many years he had lived in pain. Because of his betrayal, he had no choice but to die. Perhaps it was a kind of relief. "The East," Lu Yi replied casually. The red-robed cultivator nodded slightly. "I'm from the South. My Dao companion is—" Lu Yi raised a hand to stop him. "Don't say anything. I won't tell anyone about you." The red-robed cultivator was stunned for a moment before he said with relief, "That's good." As soon as he finished speaking, the remaining magic power in his body buzzed and a purple light bloomed from his body. As expected, he was still unwilling to die like this. If he could face death calmly, he wouldn't have chosen to join St. Blood Mountain all those years ago. He had already used the red talisman, but he still had the purple talisman. After so many years of nourishment, the purple talisman's power was not as strong as the red talisman's, but it was still not to be underestimated. As long as he could activate the purple talisman's power, he would be able to resolve the crisis before him. As he activated the purple talisman, he shouted, "Attack together." These words were undoubtedly for the Xiangyin sisters to hear. However, just as his voice fell, the world suddenly buzzed. At the same time, the red-robed cultivator's body shrank as if he was carrying a star on his back. His magic power stagnated. Not to mention that he was now an arrow at the end of its flight. Even if he was at his peak, under such terrifying suppression, he wouldn't even be able to use 30% of his strength. The red-robed cultivator's eyes widened. It was hard to imagine how someone in this world could possess such a terrifying divine nature. Compared to Blazing Heaven's divine nature, it was like a firefly competing with the bright moon. He had already learned about this from Xiang Yin in advance and had even personally asked two nearby cultivators. However, what he heard and personally experienced were two completely different things. Some things couldn't be imagined without experiencing it personally. His vision darkened. When he looked up again, Lu Yi was already in front of him. With a flash of his blade, the red-robed cultivator's vision turned upside down and then slowly turned dark. Lu Yi shook off the blood on his blade and pushed away the red-robed cultivator's headless body. He expressionlessly looked at the Xiangyin sisters. Xiangyin's face was deathly pale and her eyes were dim. Xianyu wasn't any better. The two sisters knew that today was a bad day. In terms of cultivation, the two sisters were stronger than Lu Yi. However, the suppression of the blood race's divine nature was just so unreasonable. They had already experienced it once. Now that Lu Yi had killed the red-robed cultivator, they didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting. Fortunately, Lu Yi didn't immediately kill them. He looked at Xiangyin and said, You gave me a map of this world and specifically marked out an area, hinting that I should go there to look for the Red Talisman Association. You want to borrow their hands to kill me, right? The Red Talisman Association had methods to determine whether or not a cultivator was tainted by their divine nature. This shouldn't be a secret. Xiang Yin definitely knew about it. However, Lu Yi was new to this world, so how could he possibly know about this? Therefore, Xiang Yin had specifically marked out that she wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife. As long as Lu Yi came into contact with the Red Talisman Association, he wouldn't be able to escape death. In fact, it was very likely that Xiang Yi knew that the Red Talisman Association had set up many traps in that area. If Lu Yi didn't have a doppelganger or spatial spirit runes to help him, he would have been killed long before he met with Hu Dequan. Xian Yu looked at Xiang Yin in astonishment. She clearly didn't know anything about this and didn't understand why her sister would want to kill someone she didn't even know. Yes. Xiang Yin's hoarse voice sounded. Lu Yi nodded. She had the same thoughts as him. He couldn't understand why Xiang Yin had pointed him to that area. He originally thought that she had good intentions, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. After parting with Hu Dequan and the others, Lu Yi had some guesses. He'd especially come back to find Xiang Yin and her sister. Firstly, he had nowhere else to go, and secondly, he wanted to verify some things. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to Snow Listening Peak. After I came here, you secretly contacted the sacred Blood Mountain and left while the blood moon was still in the sky. In truth, you were afraid of being affected by the Red Talisman's might. You even deliberately gave me some false hints before you left. You wanted me to be trapped in Snow Listening Peak's grand formation so that the sacred Blood Mountain could easily kill me. Yes. Xiang Yin admitted. Do we have a grudge? Lu Yi looked at her. No grudge, Xiang Yin replied. Xiang Yin, who had been keeping her head down all this time, suddenly raised her head and looked directly into Lu Ye's eyes. Pursing her lips, she said, "This is just a little girl's way of survival." Now that things had come to this, any explanation or refutation was useless. Judging from Lu Ye's decisiveness and ruthlessness, Xiang Yin knew that she wouldn't be able to escape death today, so her expression became much calmer. I plotted against you and betrayed you because I wanted to live a better life. That's all. End of chapter. Chapter 1789. What a woman's way of survival. What a good that's all. Are you using me as a bargaining chip? Lu Yi already knew what Xiang Yin was thinking. Xiang Yin smiled bitterly. You've just arrived here, so you have no idea how difficult it is to survive in this damned place. Among us sisters, which one of us is weaker than Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing? But because we've long since run out of cultivation resources, our strength has slowly become inferior to theirs. In the long run, we'll have to rely on others to survive. We're women and we're quite beautiful. Do you know what this means? If we want to survive, we have to find a way to obtain resources. We can't join the Red Talisman Association, so our only choice is St. Blood Mountain. That blazing heaven is also a lecher, so if we don't have enough bargaining chips, we sisters will end up in a miserable state. Your existence is a threat to blazing heaven, so if we can get rid of you, it will undoubtedly be a great merit. Even if we join him, we'll definitely be treated well. I hinted you to go to that area to find the Red Talisman Association because I wanted to borrow their hands to get rid of you, but I didn't expect you to return alive. St. Blood Mountain had no choice but to send another person over, but they failed again. Xiang Yin's face was filled with bitterness. She really couldn't understand why things had turned out this way. Her plan had been perfect, but the result was completely unsatisfactory. Xiang Yin suddenly knelt down and looked at Lu Yi. I know I can't escape death, but I acted on my own initiative. It has nothing to do with Big Sister. She didn't know anything about it from beginning to end. Big Sister's temperament is cold, but her heart is kind, so I begged Dao Brother to spare her life. This young woman will kowtow to you. As she spoke, she actually kowtowed in Lu Ye's direction, each kowtow extremely forcefully. A dignified late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator doing such a thing was truly lamentable. If it were only because she was about to die, Xiang Yin wouldn't have lowered her head like this. She would have just stuck out her neck and kowtowed, but she knew that if she couldn't satisfy Lu Yi, Profound Fish wouldn't be able to escape calamity after her death. She took responsibility for her own mistakes, but she didn't want to implicate Shen Yu. Shen Yu hurriedly knelt down as well. While pulling her sister, she looked at Lu Yi pleadingly. Fellow Taoist, my sister was muddle-headed for a moment. I hope that fellow Taoist will spare her life on account that she didn't commit a grave mistake. From now on, we two sisters will be your slaves, your dogs, and your horses. Xianyu begged. Tears blurred her eyes. She had lived for so many years, but she had never been so lowly. She had a cold personality, so she couldn't do such a lowly thing. She even looked down on people who did such things. But when her sister's life was hanging by a thread, her insistence and ideals instantly collapsed. At this moment, as long as Lu Yi could say the word good, she was willing to do anything. Unfortunately, Lu Yi only looked at her indifferently. I didn't make a big mistake. That's because I'm lucky. It has nothing to do with her. As he said this, he continued to urge the suppression with his holiness. Holding the long saber, he walked step by step toward the two sisters kneeling on the ground. Xiang Yin felt like she was suffocating. She knocked her head so hard that it hurt, but she still begged, "Brother, after I die, please spare my sister. Just treat her like you're raising a cat or a dog. Please don't kill her." What answered her was a flash of saber light. Xiang Yin felt a pain in her chest, and then her vision went dark. In the darkness, her consciousness floated. After a long time, when Xiang Yin opened her eyes again, the tip of her nose was surrounded by a familiar fragrance. She seemed to be lying in a soft embrace. She couldn't help but be stunned. But soon she recalled the terrifying flash of saber light and couldn't help but tremble. "You're awake." A low voice came. Xiang Yin's vision slowly focused, and she saw a weeping face right in front of her. "Sister." Xiang Yin didn't know whether she was alive or dead. If she was dead, was her sister killed as well? Xianyu seemed to have seen through her thoughts. She whispered, "You're not dead. That saber didn't take your life." Xiang Yin was stunned. Why? She recalled the scene before she fell unconscious. The murderous intent she felt was very real. Lu Yi really wanted to kill her, so she didn't understand why she wasn't dead. She couldn't say that Lu Yi had failed. After all, she hadn't resisted at all. Even if Lu Yi had failed, Lu Yi could have dealt the final blow. "I don't know." Xianyu shook her head and looked to the side. Xiang Yin followed her gaze and saw Lu Yi standing there looking up at the moon. The great terror of being on the brink of death struck her again. She couldn't help but feel fear. She averted her gaze and lowered her head to look at her chest. There was a hole in her clothes and blood had dried up. However, her injuries had already healed. She was at the late stage of the Moon Jade realm after all. It wasn't difficult for her to recover from physical injuries, even if she was unconscious. She smiled bitterly. "Sister, I've implicated you." Xianyu shook her head. "Don't say that. It's my fault." Xiang Yin said, "But from the looks of it, I'm afraid we'll really have to work like cows and horses in the future." Lu Yi didn't have any reason to spare her life. Xiang Yin guessed that this was the first time he'd come here and he was all alone. He was probably trying to recruit some helpers. The Red Talisman Association definitely wouldn't accept him, and the Sacred Blood Mountain had already made a move against him. As long as Blazing Heaven didn't get rid of Lu Yi, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. As such, the conflict between them was irreconcilable. In this current situation, Lu Yi was stuck between a rock and a hard place. It would be difficult for him to do anything by himself. Sparing the lives of the two sisters and recruiting them to his side was much better than fighting alone. It had to be said that Xiang Yin's mind was quite sharp. Lu Yi had indeed considered this when he had held back at the critical moment. In the entire inner world, the Red Talisman Association and the Sacred Blood Mountain were divided into two factions, but he couldn't join either. As such, he was forced to start from scratch. It was unrealistic to fight alone. The only helpers he could recruit now were the scattered cultivators like Xiang Yin and her sister. Moreover, there weren't many of them. Xiang Yin was a little smart and was a useful person. Moreover, she was strong enough. Most importantly, Xiang Yin had calmly accepted his sure kill attack without any intention of resisting. Moreover, there was no personal enmity between them. Xiang Yin's actions were indeed forced by the situation. She wanted to better survive here. This was the real reason why Lu Yi had spared her life at the last moment. The blood moon slowly dissipated. Lu Yi let out a breath and closed his eyes to comprehend the various visualizations he had just made. He didn't have to worry about the rainbow divine lotus spoiling things. He had gained a lot this time, but there was still a long way to go before he could completely see through the Blood Eye Spirit rune. There was no rush. There would be more opportunities in the future. He walked to the side and sat on a large rock, thinking about his next plan. He would definitely start from scratch and target the Sacred Blood Mountain. Perhaps he could try to contact the Red Talisman Association again in the future and join forces with them. There were some things that couldn't be trusted by words alone. Actions would naturally be effective. Once he started to target the Sacred Blood Mountain, the Red Talisman Association would definitely receive the news. At that time, regardless of whether the Red Talisman Association believed him or not, they would be natural allies. Most importantly, he had to find a way to find out why the seal on this world would be lifted once the Red Talisman Association and the Sacred Blood Mountain were determined. This was related to escaping from this world. It was of the utmost importance. While he was deep in thought, he heard rustling sounds. He looked up and saw Xiang Yin crawling over on all fours. Xian Yu tried to pull her up several times but failed. His expression was sorrowful and sad. Lu Yi looked at her expressionlessly. However, he had to admit that Xiang Yin's figure was very enchanting. There was a strange temptation when she crawled over in such a posture, especially when her head was half raised. It was unknown whether it was due to shyness or humiliation, but the blush on her face and the white skin on her neck formed a sharp contrast. The visual conflict was extremely intense. A moment later, Xiang Yin crawled to Lu Ye's feet. She sat up straight and lowered her head. Lu Yi looked at her indifferently. "What do you mean?" Xiang Yin said in a low voice. "Xiang Yin is willing to be your cat or dog. Thank you for not killing me." In order to save her sister's life, she had previously said something similar. She only wanted Lu Yi to raise Xian Yu like a cat or dog. Now that she said this, it was obvious that she wanted to replace Xian Yu with her body. Her act of crawling over on her knees was also a show of her sincerity. Lu Yi saw through her thoughts. He didn't feel too much pity for her. Xiang Yin had chosen to come to this point. She couldn't blame others. This woman had a good temperament. She could rise and fall with grace. If used well, she would definitely be useful. However, if used poorly, there was a risk of her betraying her master. Lu Yi especially couldn't show his weak side in front of her. He believed that as long as she had the chance, she would definitely return today's humiliation tenfold or even 100-fold. "Did I say I wouldn't kill you?" Lu Yi asked. Xiang Yin raised her head in surprise. "But before." "My hand shook. If I want you to die, I can kill you again at any time." Xiang Yin obviously didn't believe his words. What did he mean by his hand shaking? It was completely false. However, she really didn't understand what Lu Yi was thinking. She could only ask, "Then what do I have to do to satisfy you?" When she asked this, she intentionally or unintentionally revealed a touch of shyness. It was full of temptation. From the outside, everyone in the Snow Clan was pure as ice and jade. Xiang Yin's attitude at this moment was very harmful to any man. Lu Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. "If you dare to play any tricks in front of me again, I will kill your sister first." Xiang Yin's face suddenly became frightened. She immediately sat up straight and obediently said, "I won't dare. Please forgive me, brother." Lu Yi looked at her for a while, his heart uneasy. After a long time, she heard Lu Ye's voice. "If you want to live, it's simple. Refine this thing." End of chapter. Chapter 1790. Lu Yi had spared Xiang Yin's life for two reasons. First, he needed to recruit some subordinates. Xiang Yin was strong and smart enough, so she was a perfect candidate. Moreover, if he really killed Xiang Yin, he would have to kill Shen Yu as well. Second, he had a way to control Xiang Yin. Naturally, he wanted her to refine his precious blood and turn her into a blood warrior. Once she became his blood warrior, he would no longer have to worry about Xiang Yin betraying him. At that time, she would be as loyal to him as Ma Shangxi. When the drop of blood appeared on Lu Ye's fingertip, it instantly attracted the attention of Xiang Yin and Shen Yu. The two women both felt the powerful attraction this drop of precious blood had towards them. It was an instinctive desire, but at the same time, they could feel the terrifying danger contained within the precious blood. "What is this?" Shen Yu asked. She had never seen precious blood before. If Yu Yao was a true member of the blood tribe, she definitely wouldn't ask such a childish question. Any true member of the blood tribe who had reached Yu Yao's level would be able to learn the truth about the treasured blood through different channels. However, they weren't true vampires in the end. They were only first-generation vampires, created by the special environment of the core world. Their understanding of vampires was based on the constant development of their own bloodline. As such, their understanding of vampires was very one-sided and fragmented. But no matter what it was, Xian Yu realized that it wasn't easy to refine. It was definitely a method Lu Yi was using to control his sister. What surprised her even more was that this drop of blood contained an extremely powerful holy aura. This holy aura was even stronger than when they used their vampire secret techniques. While she was still bewildered, Xiang Yin's expression suddenly became resolute. She moved forward while maintaining her kneeling position, opened her small mouth and sucked on Lu Ye's finger. Her sudden action startled Lu Ye. Then he felt a soft, fragrant tongue coiling around his fingertip a few times. It was itchy. Lu Ye looked up and met Xiang Yin's eyes. He could see the determination in them. She was a smart woman. She knew that she couldn't refuse him no matter what he said, so she might as well make her stand. But in the next instant, Xiang Yin's expression changed. Lu Yi pulled her finger out, got up and went to Xian Yu. She grabbed her arm and said, "Let's go." He activated his magic power and flew into the distance. Xian Yu didn't dare to resist. He turned to Xiang Yin and shouted, "Sister." The only response she received was Xiang Yin's blood-curdling screams as a ball of dazzling golden light instantly enveloped the area around her. After a short while, Lu Yi landed on a mountain 100 miles away from Xiang Yin. He looked back, but Xiang Yin's figure was nowhere to be seen. There was only a sea of blood floating in the sea of blood. Golden light flashed in the sea of blood, and Xiang Yin's screams continued. Inside the sea of blood, her magic power fluctuated. Although Xian Yu didn't know what was going on, he knew his sister was in a bad situation. He looked at Lu Yi nervously and asked, "What happened to Xiang Yin?" Lu Yi didn't want to answer at first, but he considered that if Xiang Yin succeeded in refining the treasure blood, the two sisters would have to work for him in the future. He explained, "Normally speaking, if a blood tribe member wants to obtain holiness, they have to refine holy blood. The so-called holy blood should be the blood left behind by the blood ancestor after his death. If a blood tribe member successfully refines it, they can call themselves a holy sovereign. Holy sovereigns have a very high status in the blood tribe, far surpassing ordinary blood tribe members. This is because their holiness can suppress ordinary blood tribe members, and the upper limit of their growth is also higher. However, the process of refining holy blood is incomparably dangerous, and there is a chance of death at any time." Xian Yu's face paled. Daoist brother bestowed holy blood? Lu Yi didn't say anything. His precious blood was no different from saint blood. It wasn't wrong to call it saint blood. Back then, Ma Shangxi's process of refining precious blood was also extremely dangerous. Whether or not Xiang Yin could pass this trial would depend on her own luck. However, Lu Yi had a faint feeling that Xiang Yin wouldn't die so easily. This drop of treasure blood might bring her quite a bit of benefits. Lu Yi sat down cross-legged and thought back to his gains from observing the crimson moon. Xian Yu stood not far in front of him. Her eyes were anxiously staring hundreds of kilometers away. Her slender hands were clenched so tightly that her fingernails dug into her flesh. After a short while, she seemed to have come to a decision and flew back into the sea of blood. Lu Yi opened his eyes and looked on in astonishment as her snow-white figure rushed into the sea of blood. Even though he could stop her, Lu Yi didn't. This was Xian Yu's own decision. If he tried to stop her, it would only make her angry. Also, from his point of view, if Xiang Yin failed to refine the precious blood and died, he wouldn't be able to let Xian Yu live. Since that was the case, it wasn't a bad choice to let the two sisters live and die together. After Xian Yu also rushed into the sea of blood, Xiang Yin wasn't the only one screaming in pain. Time passed by. The two sisters' screams gradually subsided, and the golden light in the sea of blood disappeared. The sea of blood also slowly closed. When Lu Yi rushed back, he saw the two sisters hugging each other, their clothes disheveled and their bodies drenched in sweat. They looked very miserable, especially Xian Yu. Her face was full of fear. It was obvious that she had a very bad experience refining the treasure blood. On the other hand, although Xiang Yin's condition wasn't good, her eyes were very bright, as if a door to a new world had been opened. She curled up in her sister's arms and looked at Lu Yi, who was descending from the sky. Gasping for breath, she asked, "Is there more?" Lu Yi stared at her expressionlessly for a while, then said indifferently, "That depends on your performance in the future." Black Prison Cliff was where Demon Zhou Ran's cave residence was located. A great battle was breaking out, and the two sides fighting were Zhou Ran and Xiang Yin. Two figures were hiding in the sea of blood, making it difficult for others to see the situation clearly. However, judging from Zhou Ran's exasperated shouts, he was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. Moreover, it was an absolute disadvantage. At this moment, Zhou Ran was undoubtedly very shocked. Because he knew the details of the Snow Clan sisters very well, they were no match for him in a one-on-one fight, but today's battle had surprised him. He had only fought with Xiang Yin for a moment, but he was already at a disadvantage and the situation was getting worse and worse. The reason was that his own divine nature was suppressed, so he couldn't use his full strength. Zhou Ran didn't understand what was going on. When he was fighting with Xiang Yin a few days ago, her divine nature was no different from his, so why did she change so much in just a short period of time? The sea of blood suddenly dissipated, and the two sides fighting stood in the air. Do you admit defeat? Xiang Yin looked at Zhou Ran triumphantly. Zhou Ran was annoyed. How could he admit defeat? Suppressing his anger, he said, Xiang Yin, we haven't interfered with each other for so many years, so why do you have to offend me today? Xiang Yin pursed her lips and smiled. Zhou Ran, let's not talk about the past anymore. From now on, the situation in this domain will change greatly. I know that you have been considering whether or not to join St. Blood Peak all these years, but I advise you to make a good choice. Zhou Ran was confused. What choice? Xiang Yin didn't say anything. She just turned her head and looked to the side. Zhou Ran followed her gaze and found that there were two more figures there. One was the human with a strong sense of holiness that she had seen before, and the other was Xianyu. However, at this moment, Xianyu was standing not far behind the young man like a maid. Zhou Ran was puzzled. As far as he knew, this young man had already left, so why had he come back? When facing Xiang Yin, he still had the courage to struggle, but when facing Lu Yi, he didn't even dare to think about it. The terror of the divine nature's suppression was still vivid in his mind, and he often felt his heart palpitate. We sisters have already become the High Lord's subordinates, and we wish to help the High Lord in his great undertaking. We came to find you today to give you a chance. Zhou Ran, what will you choose? This short sentence shook Zhou Ran. He immediately realized that this newcomer who had just arrived in this realm was someone who didn't want to be left out. He was ambitious. No wonder Xiang Yin said that the power structure of this realm would change. Yu Yao's middle stage cultivation wasn't much, but her terrifying divine nature was undoubtedly her greatest asset. This person's entry would definitely stir up the situation in this realm. Zhou Ran's thoughts turned and he smiled bitterly. Do I have a choice? If he said a single word of no, he would immediately be suppressed to death. He sighed inwardly. He had persevered for several hundred years, but in the end he still couldn't stand alone. However, he was mentally prepared to rely on others. Just as Xiang Yin had said, he had been considering whether or not to rely on the Sacred Blood Mountain. Only by relying on the Sacred Blood Mountain would he be able to obtain spirit jades to maintain his cultivation. Now, before he could even go to the Sacred Blood Mountain, he was going to be forcibly taken in. He looked in Lu Ye's direction and cupped his fists. Zhou Ran greets the High Lord. Lu Yi nodded slightly. Xiang Yin looked at Zhou Ran with a smile. Don't feel like you've lost out. Being able to serve the High Lord is a good thing that others can't even dream of. Do you know why my divine nature has improved so much recently? Zhou Ran's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He had been wondering about this for a long time. Everyone's divine nature improved by bathing in the blood rain or eating spirit plants that were watered by the blood rain. Thus, although some people had been in this realm for a long time, the difference between them wasn't that great. After all, bathing in the blood rain didn't bring much improvement. It was just a kind of accumulation. Xiang Yin's divine nature had improved so much, which was obviously abnormal. Combined with what she had just said and the terrifying suppression Lu Yi had displayed, Zhou Ran couldn't help but think of something. Xiang Yin deliberately mystified him. That depends on your performance. Zhou Ran immediately declared, since I've become the High Lord's subordinate, Zhou Ran will do anything for you. Xiang Yin continued, let me tell you something else. Yesterday, the Sacred Blood Mountain sent a late-stage Yu Yao with a red talisman to assassinate the High Lord. In the end, the High Lord killed her. End of chapter. Chapter 1791. The explosion of the red talisman's power yesterday had caused a huge commotion. Zhou Ran naturally sensed it, but he didn't dare to investigate because those who could use the red talisman were either from the Red Talisman Association or from St. Blood Mountain. How could he have a good ending if he got involved? At that time he was worried about Xiang Yin and her sister because the commotion came from listening Snow Peak. But after hearing Xiang Yin's words, he learned that the one who used the red talisman was a late-stage Yu Yao from St. Blood Mountain. Not only did she fail to do anything to Lu Yi, she was even killed. To be able to survive the red talisman's power and even kill the enemy, such strength was undoubtedly worth relying on. Looking at Lu Yi in awe, Zhou Ran said, does High Lord plan to gather the people scattered outside? He was a smart person, so how could he not have guessed Lu Ye's intentions after seeing Xiang Yin and her sister come to him? That's right. Lu Yi nodded. Zhou Ran said, Since that's the case, we can't miss out on Wang Taixing. Although that old man is a little old, he's not weak. If High Lord is at ease, leave this matter to me. I have some personal relations with him. Xiang Yin immediately scolded, Zhou Ran, you and Wang Taixing don't get along well, so you were just putting on an act for us sisters. Zhou Ran chuckled, your sisterly relationship is deep, so old Wang and I naturally have to form an alliance. Xiang Yin curled her lips, look at your thick eyebrows and big eyes, it turns out you're also a cunning guy. After saying that, she turned to look at Lu Yi, waiting for his orders. Lu Yi thought for a moment, then said, Xiang Yin, come with me. Xiang Yin understood, yes. She instantly understood why Lu Yi wanted her to come with him. If Wang Taixing wasn't willing to submit, then he would eliminate him completely. For Lu Yi, there were two forces in this world that he needed to contend with. His foundation was still shallow, so he had to eliminate all uncontrollable factors in advance to prevent Wang Taixing from joining St. Blood Mountain in the future and becoming his enemy. Xiang Yin and Zhou Ran left. Lu Yi and Xian Yu stayed at Black Prison Cliff for the time being. Half a day later, Xiang Yin returned. Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing also came back together. There weren't too many twists and turns on this trip. After Zhou Ran went to see Wang Taixing, she only said a few words to him and Wang Taixing agreed to surrender. This made many of the words that Zhou Ran had prepared useless. Out of curiosity, Zhou Ran asked for the reason. Only then did Wang Taixing explain, it has always been rumored that after the Red Talisman Association and St. Blood Peak have a victor, the seal on this world will be broken. However, after so many years, even though St. Blood Peak has a huge advantage on the surface, they still haven't been able to destroy the Red Talisman Association. I'm afraid that Blazing Heaven doesn't have the ability to do so. This old man understands Blazing Heaven. He only has the advantage of being the first to enter this world. However, this newcomer is different. His future prospects are much brighter than Blazing Heaven's. Perhaps one day he will be able to replace Blazing Heaven. When that time comes, the Red Talisman Association will have no reason to survive. Only then did Zhou Ran understand. In Wang Taixing's opinion, Lu Yi might be the key to destroying the Red Talisman Association in the future. Once the Red Talisman Association was gone, the seal on this world would be broken. At that time, the cultivators who were trapped here would naturally be able to leave. Zhou Ran thought about it carefully and found that Wang Taixing's words made a lot of sense. This made her even more determined to follow Lu Yi. In fact, in Wang Taixing's opinion, the most effective way was for Lu Yi to lead them to St. Blood Peak and use the St. Blood Peak's resources to cultivate and grow stronger. After all, if they were to fight against the Red Talisman Association, the blood race's divine nature would not be of any use. However, he knew that it was impossible for Blazing Heaven to allow Lu Yi to live under his nose. Coupled with the fact that he'd found out from Zhou Ran that St. Blood Peak had already launched an attack against Lu Yi, it was even more impossible for Lu Yi to lead them to seek refuge with St. Blood Peak. Wang Taixing only had one wish, and that was to leave this damned place before his lifespan ran out. In Black Prison Cliff, Lu Yi sat upright and looked at the four people on his left and right. In just 2 short days he already had 4 great generals under his command, and each of them had strength at the late Moon Jade realm. Of course, there was no need to doubt the loyalty of Xiang Yin and her sister. However, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing were different from them. Lu Yi had gathered people mainly to deal with the cultivators of St. Blood Peak. Since this was the case, the divine nature of his subordinates was very important. After all, if they were to fight against St. Blood Peak in the future, having a strong divine nature would give them a great advantage. Thus, the first thing Lu Yi needed to do was increase their divine nature. At the same time, he needed to eliminate the possibility that they would betray him in the future. As he was thinking, 2 drops of golden blood seeped out from his fingertips and he flicked them towards Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing. He ordered, refine them. He didn't discuss anything with them. Although this was very risky and might even cause Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing to pay with their lives, the current situation did not allow him to be soft-hearted. Looking at the drops of golden blood floating towards them, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing were bewildered because they had never seen it before. But soon, Zhou Ran revealed a happy expression because he vaguely sensed that the changes in Xiang Yin and her sister's divine nature were definitely related to the golden blood in front of him. So he didn't hesitate and cupped his fists with a happy expression. Many thanks, High Lord. He didn't think that refining this treasure would be so risky. Wang Taixing had thought about it even more, but how could he refuse in the current situation? Since he had come to seek refuge, he naturally had to show his sincerity. He immediately cupped his fists and said, yes. The two of them each obtained a drop of golden blood and rushed out of their cave dwellings to refine it. Soon, intense magic power fluctuations came from nearby and Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing's pitiful cries could be heard. High Lord, you can't be so biased. Xiang Yin looked at Lu Yi with a pitiful expression. Lu Yi had never seen such a person before. Logically speaking, Xiang Yin had experienced the dangers of refining golden blood and should be well aware of the dangers involved. She had been lucky enough to succeed once and should have avoided it, but now she actually took the initiative to ask for it. As she spoke, she came over and grabbed Lu Ye's arm and began to shake it. High Lord, give us sisters some too. Lu Yi had warned her before not to play tricks in front of him, and she had agreed in horror. But that was then and this was now. At that time, she hadn't refined the golden blood and wasn't considered one of Lu Ye's people. She was only afraid of his abuse of power. But now, things were different. After refining Lu Ye's golden blood, she was his woman in the truest sense of the word. So what if she acted coquettishly? She believed that Lu Yi wouldn't vent his anger on her because of this. No, you've just refined it. It's too risky to refine it again. Lu Yi remained unmoved. Every time a blood race member refined a sacred blood, they would walk the line between life and death. It wasn't easy for him to find useful subordinates, so how could he be willing to let these sisters take another risk? Xiang Yin hugged Lu Ye's arm tightly and shook it with all her might. Her fierce elasticity caused Lu Ye's heart to skip a beat. She said in a coquettish voice, "But High Lord, we sisters were the first to submit to you, so we've only shared a single drop. If the two of them get a drop each, their holiness will be stronger than ours. This isn't fair." There's no fairness in this matter. Lu Ye's expression was cold. Xiang Yin lowered her body and knelt in front of Lu Yi. She looked up at him with a pious expression as if she was looking at her own sky. "High Lord, please give us sisters a drop each. As long as we each have a drop, we'll do anything you want." As she spoke, her coquettish eyes were like silk. Lu Yi didn't have a temper. He looked up at Xian Yu and said, "Manage your sister well." Xian Yu stammered and lowered her head. "High Lord, I feel refining a sacred blood isn't as dangerous as you say. Although the process is difficult, refining another drop shouldn't be a problem." Lu Yi stared at Xian Yu dumbstruck. He never would have thought that the elder sister would stand on the same side as the younger sister on this matter. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi said, "If you want sacred blood, sure." Xiang Yin's eyes lit up. However, Lu Yi changed the topic. "If Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing succeed in refining the sacred blood in return, I'll give each of you a drop of sacred blood. But if either of them fails, don't mention this matter again." Xiang Yin jumped up in joy. "High Lord, you said it yourself." She quickly stood up from the ground and called out to her sister. "Let's go and cheer them up." Xian Yu stepped forward and followed. Lu Yi coldly watched from the sidelines. In his opinion, Zhou Ran's success rate in refining sacred blood was still somewhat high. After all, he was still in the prime of his life. However, he didn't know how high the success rate would be. Perhaps he would fail and die. However, Wang Taixing's success rate was obviously not high. Between the two of them, the best result was that one of them succeeded. The worst result was that both of them failed. As for both of them succeeding, Lu Yi felt it was unrealistic. But in this kind of environment, if he wanted to gather loyal subordinates, letting them refine his sacred blood was the only way. Time flew by. After half a day, Lu Yi looked up in astonishment. Although his vision was blocked, his divine sense wasn't affected. He sensed Wang Taixing's aura. Wang Taixing had actually succeeded in refining his sacred blood. This surprised Lu Yi because it was a little different from what he had expected. What shocked him even more was that not long after Wang Taixing succeeded in refining his sacred blood, Zhou Ran also succeeded. Things didn't seem quite right. His sacred blood wasn't much different from the sacred blood circulating within the blood tribe. Of course, this no difference referred to the strength of the sacred nature obtained after refining it. This had already been verified by Ma Shangxi. After refining a drop of his sacred blood, Ma Shangxi's sacred nature was equivalent to a drop of sacred blood refined by other blood tribe members. However, if refining sacred blood was so simple, then countless blood tribe members wouldn't have died during the refinement process in the blood refinement realm. Xiang Yin and her sister's previous success could be explained by the fact that the two sisters had shared a drop of precious blood, which reduced the risk. However, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing's current situation was clearly different from what Lu Yi had expected. End of chapter. Chapter 1792. Including Ma Shangxi, none of the people Lu Yi had bestowed with precious blood had failed. This was undoubtedly abnormal. Even though Ma Shangxi, Xiang Yin, and the others were all at the late-stage Yu Yao realm, the perils of refining holy blood shouldn't have much to do with one's cultivation. Instead, refining holy blood was a process of developing and refining one's blood tribe bloodline. Lu Yi faintly had an idea in his heart. His precious blood might be somewhat different from the real blood race's saint blood, and this difference should be able to greatly reduce the risk of refining it. The reason for this conjecture was naturally because of his talent tree. During the process of refining the blood race holy blood, his talent tree had burned away everything that was detrimental to him, leaving behind only those that weren't a threat to him. As such, the precious blood he refined was naturally different from the holy blood. Although both could stimulate one's blood race bloodline, his precious blood was undoubtedly much weaker in terms of lethality. If true holy blood was extremely poisonous, then his precious blood wasn't as poisonous. Thus, the risk of refining it wasn't as great for the blood servants. Of course, this was only his conjecture. Whether or not this was the case had yet to be verified. It was also possible that Xiang Yin and the other first-generation blood race members were different from ordinary blood race members. Because of their status as first-generation blood race members, they could withstand greater risks during the refining process. But no matter which possibility it was a good thing for Lu Yi. After a short while, Xiang Yin and the others returned together. Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing looked at Lu Yi with different eyes. Before they had only submitted because of Lu Ye's holy aura, but now they had truly submitted. Great Lord. Xiang Yin looked at Lu Yi expectantly, almost reminding him not to go back on his word. Lu Yi ignored her and looked at Xian Yu instead. Can I really refine another drop? Xian Yu replied cautiously, we sisters are willing to do our best to live up to Great Lord's expectations. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then flicked his finger and bestowed his last 2 drops of precious blood. He also wanted to know if his conjecture was correct. The Snow Race sisters each received a drop of precious blood and happily ran out to refine it. Lu Yi sat cross-legged and spread out his divine sense to investigate, the 2 sisters' miserable cries resounding in his ears one after another. Even though the process was arduous, the results were good. Half a day later, the Xiang Yin sisters successfully refined the precious blood. Apart from being in a sorry state, there weren't any other problems. At this point, Lu Yi was finally sure of one thing. His precious blood was not the same as the blood race's sacred blood. Its lethality was much lower than that of the sacred blood. This was undoubtedly good news because in this way he could gather more people with peace of mind. Although there weren't many cultivators scattered in this world, it was still a good thing to have one more. Moreover, every single one of them that came to his side would be able to rapidly improve their own holiness. In the future they would undoubtedly be of great use in resisting the Saint Blood Peak. After 2 days of rest, Xiang Yin and the other 3 were sent out by Lu Yi. Their task was to search for scattered cultivators and bring them back. Lu Yi himself remained at Black Prison Cliff to refine his precious blood. He originally had 5 drops of precious blood, but they had all been used up in the past few days, so he could only refine them again. Refining precious blood was not an easy task. Even though his cultivation had increased, it still took him more than half a month to refine a single drop. Moreover, each drop of precious blood consumed a great deal of his foundation and required a large amount of resources to replenish it. While he was refining, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes. In the next moment he stood up and the void spirit runes under his feet quickly formed. With a flash of light, his figure disappeared. 100 kilometers away from Snow Listening Peak, a figure was quietly lying dormant, looking at the flattened Snow Listening Peak with a puzzled expression. Some time ago, the Saint Blood Peak received news that a newcomer had arrived in this world. This newcomer's holiness was unprecedented and extremely terrifying. It just so happened that 2 Snow Race members of Snow Listening Peak wanted to join the Saint Blood Peak, so they leaked this newcomer's whereabouts to the Saint Blood Peak. The Saint Blood Peak naturally did not dare to be negligent. Immediately, a late-stage Moon Jade cultivator was ordered by Blazing Heaven to bring the Red Talisman to kill this newcomer. At that time, if not for the fact that Blazing Heaven had other important matters to attend to, he would have personally come to meet this newcomer. However, that late-stage Moon Jade cultivator quickly lost contact with the Saint Blood Peak, so it was basically certain that she was dead. This made the Saint Blood Peak very uneasy, so they naturally sent someone to investigate the situation. This ghost cultivator was sent because of this matter, but after investigating he was very confused. He had no idea what had happened to his late-stage Moon Jade cultivator. The red talisman must have been activated. Otherwise, Snow Listening Peak would not have disappeared for no reason. Moreover, the location where Snow Listening Peak disappeared did indeed have remnants of the red talisman's aura. Logically speaking, no cultivator should be able to resist the red talisman's power, let alone a mid-stage moonjade cultivator. Then what was the matter with his companion's disappearance? He thought of the snow race member who had tipped off the St. Blood Peak. If he wanted to find out what had happened, he would have to find that snow race member and ask him personally. After making up his mind, the ghost cultivator prepared to leave this place first. However, as he turned around, he suddenly froze on the spot as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. In the sky not far away, a figure stood in mid-air, looking indifferently in his direction. The ghost cultivator was shocked. He had not even noticed the other party's movements before. There was only one possibility in this situation, and that was that the other party was even better than him in terms of stealth. Upon closer inspection, the figure was in his 20s. He had a long saber at his waist and was dressed in a tight black and white robe. His cultivation was at the mid-stage moon jade cultivator. The ghost cultivator immediately knew the identity of this person. It was obviously the newcomer that the snow race had mentioned. While the ghost cultivator's thoughts were changing, Lu Yi just quietly stared in the direction where he was hibernating. This ghost cultivator was quite accomplished in terms of stealth. Even if Lu Yi activated the Insight Spirit Tattoo, he could only see some blurry traces and could not see through his true body. When he left Snow Listening Peak with the Xiang sisters for Black Prison Cliff, Lu Yi knew that the St. Blood Peak would definitely send someone to investigate the situation here. Therefore, he left a talent tree clone here to monitor the surroundings. This ghost cultivator had arrived silently. If it were not for the fact that he had leaked a trace of spiritual power when he was investigating the Snow Listening Peak, the talent tree clone might not have been able to detect him. As he observed, he found that the ghost cultivator did not move at all. He seemed to naively think that it was just a coincidence that Lu Yi was looking in this direction and did not find any trace of him. Lu Yi stepped forward. The blood mist around him swept forward with a loud rumble. In an instant, a sea of blood stretched across, enveloping the surrounding space. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi moved, the ghost cultivator was ready to use an escape technique to leave this place. However, the suppression of the terrifying Saint Nature caused his spiritual power to suddenly stagnate. When he came back to his senses, he was already enveloped by the sea of blood. Ah! He screamed, his eyes filled with fear and his eyes trembled violently. Although he had long heard from the snow race of the Snow Listening Peak that the newcomer Saint Nature was abnormally strong, that was only hearsay after all. Now that he had personally experienced it, he realized that the intensity of the Saint Nature was far beyond his understanding. Under the suppression of the other party's Saint Nature, he felt like a rabbit that had encountered a tiger. He could only tremble. His hands and feet were a little weak, and he could not summon the courage to resist at all. In the thick sea of blood, a figure slowly approached him. The ghost cultivator bit the tip of his tongue. Only then did he summon up all his strength. The short blade in his hand fiercely stabbed forward. Under the release of his spiritual power, the sea of blood was split open. However, this desperate attack did not have any effect. Lu Yi's long saber slashed down. Not only did it block his short blade, but it even cut off his arms. The ghost cultivator staggered back, enduring the pain. His forehead was sweating. Looking at the figure that was slowly approaching him, he knew that he was probably doomed this time. After a short while, the sea of blood dissipated. Lu Yi carried the ghost cultivator who had completely lost the ability to resist and flew toward Black Prison Cliff. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In the cave, Lu Yi opened his eyes. After half a month of hard work, he had finally condensed a drop of precious blood. It was really not easy. He directly got up and walked to the side. Soon he came to a room. In this room, two figures were sitting upright. One was the ghost cultivator that he had captured alive before. The other's severed arms had been reattached. Lu Yi had no intention of imprisoning him. Only the talent tree clone was guarding here. The ghost cultivator probably knew that he could not escape, so he had been very quiet during this period. However, he could not figure out what Lu Yi was trying to do. In the end, he still felt uneasy. He had asked the talent tree clone many times, but the clone did not give him any response at all. Seeing Lu Yi's original body walk in, the ghost cultivator looked at the clone and then looked at the original body. Only then did he ask, "What do you want to do?" Killing but not killing, releasing but not letting go was really torturous. "I'll give you an opportunity. Do you want it?" Lu Yi looked at him and asked. The ghost cultivator frowned. What do you mean? Lu Yi flicked his finger, and the fresh precious blood flew toward the ghost cultivator. Refine it and you'll know. The ghost cultivator suspiciously looked at the precious blood floating in front of him. He instinctively felt that this thing was not something good. However, the powerful saint nature contained in this drop of precious blood made him very tempted. What is this? The ghost cultivator asked. Refine it. You have no other choice. Lu Ye's voice was as calm as water. Hearing this, the ghost cultivator was immediately discouraged. Now that he was on the chopping block, he really had no other choice. He faintly guessed that this was probably a method used by the other party to control him, so refining it should not be too risky. If the other party really wanted to kill him, he would not have brought him back. He looked deeply at Lu Yi, gritted his teeth, and grabbed the precious blood in his hand. In the next moment, he felt that this drop of precious blood seemed to have become a living thing and seeped into his flesh and blood. A miserable scream rang out. Lu Yi retreated to the side and waited quietly. After more than half a day, when the golden light dissipated, the ghost cultivator was lying on the ground covered in sweat. His body twitched slightly. He looked miserable, but he was still alive. Lu Yi was more and more certain that his previous guess about the precious blood was correct. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why the blood tribe members who refined his precious blood were all alive. End of chapter. Chapter 1793. A moment later, the ghost cultivator knelt on one knee in front of Lu Yi with a respectful expression. After refining his precious blood, the ghost cultivator had a natural sense of awe towards Lu Yi. What's your name? Lu Yi asked. Zhou Tianbao. The ghost cultivator replied. How long have you been in this world? After asking a few simple questions and learning a little bit about his new blood warrior, Lu Yi suddenly changed the subject. Zhou Tianbao, I have something I need you to do. Does Sir want me to return to St. Blood Mountain? Zhou Tianbao looked up at Lu Yi. Lu Yi nodded slightly. You are a smart person. The reason why Lu Yi had spared Zhou Tianbao's life and allowed him to refine his precious blood was because of this. After waiting for half a month, Zhou Tianbao had also considered this possibility. If Lu Yi had known that the risk of refining his precious blood wasn't so great, he wouldn't have killed the late-stage Moon Jade who used the red talisman. Instead, he could have directly subdued her. Of course, it wasn't too late to make these arrangements now, but there were still some problems that needed to be solved. You've been delayed for so long without any news. If Blazing Heaven asks, how will you explain this? Lu Yi asked. Zhou Tianbao replied, Sir, you don't need to worry about this. When I go out to carry out a mission, sometimes I need to hide for a long time. It's common for me to not respond to any news. Lu Yi nodded, then asked, how will you explain the death of the Red Talisman Association's traitor? Zhou Tianbao thought for a moment, then said, the Snow Clan sisters have long since submitted to the Red Talisman Association. The previous matter was completely a trap set by the Red Talisman Association. Lu Yi frowned. The Red Talisman Association doesn't accept cultivators tainted with divine attribute. It doesn't make sense for the Snow Clan sisters to submit to them. Zhou Tianbao said, the Snow Clan sisters were coerced by the Red Talisman Association, so they spread fake news. They wanted to lure Blazing Heaven out and use the power of the Red Talisman to kill him. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. This explanation was barely acceptable. For the next half a day, Lu Yi and Zhou Tianbao discussed a few more things. After confirming that there wouldn't be any major problems after returning, Lu Yi let him leave. However, after talking with Zhou Tianbao, Lu Yi understood something else. Back then, St. Blood Peak had sent a late-stage Moon Jade cultivator with a red talisman to deal with him. He had been a bit puzzled because if he were Blazing Heaven he would have done it himself. In terms of holiness, Blazing Heaven was undoubtedly the strongest in this world. In terms of cultivation he was also the strongest. Now that a newcomer who seemed to have a stronger holiness than him had suddenly appeared, he had to investigate this newcomer no matter what. There was no need to use a strategic weapon like the Red Talisman. However, after Zhou Tianbao's explanation, Lu Yi finally understood the reason. Blazing Heaven seemed to have something important to deal with during this time, so he couldn't get away. Zhou Tianbao guessed that Blazing Heaven was in seclusion to comprehend a secret technique. But no matter what, Blazing Heaven not personally appearing was a good thing for Lu Yi. Although Lu Yi was confident that he could suppress Blazing Heaven's holiness, his opponent was still Sunshine. Lu Yi wasn't sure if he could defeat Blazing Heaven even after suppressing him. After all, Blazing Heaven's might wasn't that easy to predict. He had no choice in his position. The Saint Blood Peak would definitely become his enemy. Since that was the case, planting a spy there would undoubtedly be very helpful. Lu Yi didn't think of directly attacking the Saint Blood Peak. That would be courting death. According to his understanding, the Saint Blood Peak's foundation wasn't weak. It wasn't something he could shake with his current manpower. Fortunately, there was still the Red Talisman Association. There would definitely be a fierce battle between the two in the near future. What Lu Yi needed to do now was to accumulate strength on his side. Only then would he have the qualifications to intervene when the two sides fought. Another half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Xiang Yin's group of 4 returned one after another, each bringing back a few scattered cultivators. There weren't many of them, only 7 or 8 in total. Moreover, their cultivations were uneven. There was Yu Yao and there was even a star constellation. These cultivators were in the same situation as Xiang Yin's group. The Red Talisman Association lacked resources and didn't want to waste energy on them. The Saint Blood Peak felt that these cultivators would join them sooner or later, so they gave them some breathing space. However, with Lu Ye's arrival, the situation in this realm had changed. Lu Yi wanted to gather useful people so they couldn't stay out of trouble. Coupled with the fact that Xiang Yin's group had some connections with these people, it was very easy to track them down. They had just been forcibly subdued, so it was difficult to say whether they were loyal or not. Lu Yi didn't care about this. As long as he had enough time and condensed enough precious blood, he would definitely have a loyal group under his command. This kind of loyalty was something the Red Talisman Association and the Saint Blood Peak couldn't hope for. On this day, Xiang Yin, who was cultivating, suddenly opened her eyes. She took out a sound talisman and checked it. She immediately stood up and said, "Big sister, the Lord has summoned us." Since Lu Ye's arrival, they no longer had to worry about not having enough spirit jades to use. Moreover, after refining the treasure blood, their own blood clan bloodline had greatly improved. From the inheritance of their bloodline, they had recently comprehended many blood clan secret techniques. It could be said that although their cultivation did not increase, their strength had increased by a lot. Okay. Xian Yu also stood up and prepared to meet Lu Yi with Xiang Yin. However, they had only taken a few steps when Xiang Yin shouted, "Wait!" While Xian Yu was puzzled, Xiang Yin had already arrived in front of her. She looked her up and down, then raised her hand to unbutton the top button of her clothes. She then used all her strength to push her chest, squeezing it towards the center. "What are you doing?" Xian Yu blushed. Xiang Yin pursed her lips and smiled. "To put the Lord in a good mood." Xian Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How could this put the Lord in a good mood? The High Lord was a person who achieved great things. He was very dignified and had a great bearing. When he spoke to his subordinates, he was always serious and respectful. How could such a High Lord be seduced by a woman? If he really was lustful, the 2 sisters would have been his exclusive property long ago. Even so, Xian Yu didn't resist. If this could put the Lord in a good mood, then she would do it without hesitation. After dealing with her big sister, Xiang Yin also tidied herself. After a short while, the 2 sisters arrived at Lu Ye's residence. "My lord." After saluting, Xian Yu carefully raised her eyes and saw the Lord's gaze fall on her neck. Then he looked down and stared at her seriously. Xian Yu couldn't help but blush, and when she met Lu Ye's gaze, her cheeks turned even redder and she hurriedly lowered her head. Up above, Lu Yi coughed lightly and said, "Xian Yu, Xiang Yin, listen." "Yes." The 2 sisters' expressions became serious. "Take this and set up an ambush near Jinfeng Valley within 2 days. You can choose your men." "Yes." The 2 sisters obeyed. Xiang Yin stepped forward and took a jade box from Lu Yi. Lu Yi felt Xiang Yin deliberately scratch the back of his hand with her finger. He really didn't have any temper with this woman. Compared to her big sister, she was like a seductive fairy, teasing him from time to time. Lu Yi couldn't understand how the Snow Clan, who had always been known for their cold temperament, could produce such a character. She was simply the shame of the Snow Clan. Xian Yu asked, "My lord, who are we going to ambush?" "Saint Blood Mountain." Lu Yi replied. The news came from Zhou Tianbao, who said that Saint Blood Mountain would soon take action against the Red Talisman Association. Perhaps the Red Talisman Association will appear. Remember, don't get into any conflict with them. If you can help, don't be stingy. As for the things in the jade box, use them as you see fit. "Yes." Xian Yu respectfully replied. "Also, take your own safety as the most important thing. Whether it's this time or the next time, Your life is the priority in all missions. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin felt a warm current in their hearts. They felt even more fortunate to have submitted to their Lord. If they had joined Saint Blood Mountain, Blazing Heaven wouldn't have said such words to them. The two sisters quickly left. Several days later they returned safely. They weren't weak, both of them at the late stage of Moon Jade Realm. Now that they had refined a drop and a half of Saint Blood Mountain's blood, their holiness had greatly improved. They naturally had the upper hand when facing Saint Blood Mountain's cultivators. After listening to the sisters' report on this mission, Lu Yi nodded in satisfaction. Overall, this mission could be considered a successful completion. Not only did they deal a heavy blow to Saint Blood Mountain's team, but they also sold the Red Talisman Association a favor at a critical moment. He casually gave them some cultivation resources and ordered them to rest for the time being. Lu Yi once again immersed himself in refining Saint Blood Mountain's blood. In the past he had always kept 5 drops of Saint Blood Mountain with him. No matter what situation he faced, 5 drops of Saint Blood Mountain's blood was enough. However, ever since he discovered that he could use Saint Blood Mountain's first-generation Blood Mountain to easily subdue this world's first-generation Blood Mountain, his supply of Saint Blood Mountain's blood was in short supply. Whenever new Saint Blood was refined, it would be quickly consumed. In this regard, Lu Yi was quite helpless. He could only continue to refine Saint Blood Mountain's blood without rest. For this reason, he didn't even have time to cultivate. At most, he could use resources to recover his consumption in refining Saint Blood Mountain's blood. Placing Zhou Tianbao at Saint Blood Mountain's side was undoubtedly an extremely wise move. With him providing information, even the slightest movement from Saint Blood Mountain couldn't escape Lu Ye's notice. In the next few months, the cultivators on Black Prison Cliff's side moved out several times. Except for the one time where they didn't encounter Saint Blood Mountain's people at the ambush site, the other times they reaped some benefits. After a few times, Saint Blood Mountain's side clearly realized the seriousness of the problem and made some corresponding changes in strategy. In a hidden underground space, several figures gathered. If Lu Yi was here, he would definitely recognize Hu Dequan, Meng Su, Yang Ling, and the others whom he had met before. The Red Talisman Association had many strongholds in this world. However, most of them could be abandoned. Only this stronghold could not be abandoned. This was because the Red Talisman Association had spent a lot of time and effort to establish their foundation. A large number of spiritual plants were planted here, and it was the foundation of the Red Talisman Association's cultivators to maintain their cultivation. It could be said that if this stronghold was discovered and conquered by Saint Blood Mountain's people, there would no longer be a place for the Red Talisman Association in this world. This was because their magic power would be exhausted sooner or later. Without resources to replenish it, they would definitely be tainted by Saint Blood Mountain's divine nature. At this moment, the main figures of the Red Talisman Association were gathered here to discuss matters. End of chapter. Chapter 1794. In the secret chamber of the stronghold, Hu Dequan's voice sounded slowly. In the past few months, a new force seems to have emerged in this world and is targeting Saint Blood Peak. Saint Blood Peak's operations have been foiled several times and they have suffered great losses. Where did this force come from? Yang Ling frowned. Hu Dequan was usually in charge of dealing with external affairs. Usually he would either cultivate or sleep to maintain his battle prowess. This was because he was the strongest person in the Red Talisman Association. He had 2 red talismans in his hand, and it could be said that he was the trump card against the Sacred Blood Mountain. In the past, he had been the one to step forward and restrain Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss. So when he heard Hu Dequan say that a new force had appeared in this world, Yang Ling was very confused. For so many years, this world had maintained the situation of 2 major forces fighting against each other. They had long been used to it. How could a third party suddenly appear? Hu Dequan said, "It's from Black Prison Cliff. It seems to be an organization formed by those loose cultivators." An organization formed by loose cultivators. Yang Ling was even more surprised. They can cause Saint Blood Peak to suffer losses? Hu Dequan nodded. So I also don't understand what's going on. It was not that he looked down on those loose cultivators. It was undeniable that there were a few of them with decent strength. If they had not been corroded by the blood rain early on and been tainted with the divine nature, the Red Talisman Association would definitely think of ways to rope them in. But because they had suffered losses in the past, The Red Talisman Association did not dare to accept those cultivators with the divine nature. They also could not waste their energy to deal with them, so they could only leave them alone. However, Hu Dequan was the first one who didn't believe that these people could make the sacred blood peak suffer losses. Those scattered cultivators generally hadn't been in this world for too long, so in terms of holiness, they were weaker than the cultivators of the sacred blood peak. Once they fought with the sacred blood peak, they would definitely be suppressed in terms of holiness. But this was the information he had gathered. Meng Su nodded. I've heard about this too. It said that several teams of Saint Blood Peak that were carrying out missions outside were completely wiped out. Only a few people managed to escape. Yang Ling's face was full of surprise. These loose practitioners are really something. He then frowned. But why are they doing this? Logically speaking, the only way out for these independent cultivators was to side with Saint Blood Peak, because the Red Talisman Association would absolutely not accept them. Yet now, not only had they not sided with Saint Blood Peak, they'd banded together to go against Saint Blood Peak instead. Are they tired of living? Hu Dequan pondered and said, I'm guessing that someone might want to replace Blazing Heaven. Yang Ling was startled. There are actually people with such ambitions among those wandering cultivators? If there were, they would have shown themselves long ago, and would not have taken action only recently. Meng Su suddenly asked, do you still remember that little brother? A young face immediately appeared in their minds. After all, it was something that happened a few months ago. How could they not remember? The changes in this world seem to have happened after this person arrived. Could this be his doing? Meng Su guessed. Yang Ling frowned and said, he is just a middle-stage Moon Jade. How can he have such ability? There are a few late-stage Moon Jade cultivators among those wandering cultivators. Even if he has the deterrence of the Red Talisman Association, how can he subdue those wandering cultivators? And even make them risk their lives for him in Saint Blood Peak? But the timing is a little too coincidental. The timing was indeed coincidental, but none of them believed that it was that little brother who had united the rogue cultivators to fight against the Saint Blood Mountain. I'm going to find an opportunity to get in touch with Black Prison Cliff and see what's going on, Hu Dequan said. Although the Red Talisman Association could not accept those cultivators who were tainted by divine nature, they could still cooperate with the enemy of their enemy. Black Prison Cliff and Saint Blood Peak already had irreconcilable conflicts. Even if there were no benefits for the Red Talisman Association to get in touch with them, there would be no harm. That's possible. Meng Su nodded. But we still have to be careful. Maybe this is a trick by Saint Blood Peak. Even if it isn't, they might not be on the same side as us. I'll be careful. Hu Dequan sighed. A new battle for supremacy in Black Abyss is in another half a year. I wonder if we'll be able to hold on this time. In the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss, it had always been Saint Blood Peak that occupied the advantage, and the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on bitterly because of the might of the Red Talisman Association. But after so many years, the Red Talisman Association had been using less and less. Presently, they still had a few red talismans that they could utilize, but once all of them were exhausted, then they wouldn't have the ability to resist any longer. If they wanted to struggle on while at death's door, then they would have to obtain more red talismans from Mount Innerheart. Their expressions were slightly helpless when the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss was mentioned, and they truly didn't know when such days would come to an end. Amidst this silence, a voice suddenly sounded out from above. Because of the thick layer of earth, the voice was slightly illusory and indistinct, but it still entered clearly into their ears. Fellow Taoists, can you show yourself? The expressions of Hu Dequan and the others changed, and they glanced at each other as they realized the severity of the problem. The base of the Red Talisman Association has been exposed. This undoubtedly caused them to be extremely terrified, but fortunately, it wasn't Saint Blood Peak that came to look for them, and it was a slightly familiar voice instead. It was precisely that little brother they'd spoken about earlier. After a short moment of hesitation, the three of them made a decision. Since Saint Blood Peak had already come looking for them, they were definitely unable to avoid him. They had to figure out how this little brother knew the exact location of this base, and they had to figure out the reason he'd come. If it was possible, it was best if they could make him stay here, otherwise the location of this base would be exposed to Saint Blood Peak one day. After a short while, energy rose and fell within a concealed cave while the grand formation droned, and then Hu Dequan's figure was revealed. They usually traveled to and from the base via teleportation formations, and there was more than one such formation. Hu Dequan had undoubtedly made an appearance by himself with the intention of making Lu Yi lower his guard, and then the other cultivators of the Red Talisman Association would appear from other formations and completely encircle Lu Yi. There was no problem with the Red Talisman Association's plan, but when Hu Dequan arrived at Lu Yi's location, he couldn't help but be stunned. Because when he looked over, Lu Yi wasn't the only one there. With him in the lead, there were over 10 figures standing behind him. Most of them looked extremely familiar, and even if they hadn't interacted with them, they'd seen them from afar. Obviously, they were those cultivators that were scattered outside. Were these rogue cultivators really united by him? In that case, the actions against the Sacred Blood Mountain in the past few months were also led by Lu Yi? Even though Hu Dequan had thought of this before, he was still shocked when he saw it with his own eyes. He didn't know what kind of means Lu Yi had to be able to gather such a force in such a short time. Moreover, looking at the attitude of those rogue cultivators, they seemed to be quite respectful to him. This was going to be troublesome. They'd originally thought that Lu Yi had come alone and wanted to keep him here, but now there were more than 10 people on the other side, and there were as many as 4 of them in the late stage of the Moon Jade realm. How could the Red Talisman Association keep him here? It wasn't that they couldn't keep him here, but if they forcefully made a move, both sides would only suffer. It could even be said that if they made a big commotion and were discovered by the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain, the consequences would be even more severe. Thinking of this, Hu Dequan hurriedly urged the Sound Talisman and sent a message out, telling Yang Ling and Meng Su, who were approaching from other routes, to stay calm. He didn't see any hostility from Lu Yi, so he wanted to figure out the other party's intentions first. "Brother, we meet again." Lu Yi looked at Hu Dequan. Hu Dequan's expression was complicated, and he sighed slightly. "Brother, what are you up to?" He'd suddenly brought a group of people here, and directly found the most hidden base of the Red Talisman Association. No matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem to have good intentions, but they didn't seem to have any hostility. This made Hu Dequan very confused. "I'm just here to give you a heads up." Lu Yi looked at him with a sincere expression. "Your base has been exposed, and the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain are on their way to encircle and annihilate you, so you'd better pack up and leave." It had to be said that the Red Talisman Association's base was hidden very well. It hadn't been discovered for so many years, and it provided the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association with the strength to persist. However, the Sacred Blood Mountain wasn't to be trifled with. Blazing Heaven had always wanted to find this base, and he'd spent a lot of effort and manpower to do so. A few days ago he'd finally made a discovery. Lu Yi knew about this because of the spies he'd planted in the Sacred Blood Mountain. Otherwise, with his background in this world, it would be impossible for him to find this place. Hearing this, Hu Dequan's expression changed drastically. "Where did you get this information from?" Lu Yi looked at him and didn't explain. "I was able to find this place. Does fellow Taoist still not understand?" Hu Dequan's expression was uncertain. He instinctively felt that Lu Yi had informed the Sacred Blood Mountain, but after thinking about it carefully, he didn't think that was possible. The two sides had been fighting fiercely in the past few months, and the Sacred Blood Mountain had suffered a few losses. It was impossible for Lu Yi to do such a thing. Moreover, Lu Yi wouldn't have informed the Sacred Blood Mountain and then come to remind them. "Fellow Taoist, I understand the rules of recruiting people, but sometimes it's not a good thing to stick to the rules. In the face of a common enemy, only by working together can we find a way out. That's all I have to say. Farewell." Saying so, Lu Yi turned around and was about to leave. Hu Dequan's expression changed. On one hand he was shocked by the information he'd received, but on the other hand he was conflicted by Lu Yi's words. Suddenly he raised his hand and said, "Wait." Lu Yi stopped and turned to look at him. Hu Dequan said, "How about we exchange notes?" He had planned to go to Black Prison Cliff to get in touch with these loose cultivators, and now that they'd taken the initiative to come to him, he naturally went with the flow. "Okay." Lu Yi flicked his finger, sending a note flying out. After a short while they exchanged notes. Only then did Lu Yi lead his subordinates into a sea of blood and rush into the distance. They could no longer stay at Black Prison Cliff. While the Sacred Blood Mountain was making a move here, they had also sent many cultivators to Black Prison Cliff. The Sacred Blood Mountain had been deeply involved in this world for many years, so they were quite well informed. In the past few months, the Sacred Blood Mountain had made several heavy moves against the Sacred Blood Mountain, so it was impossible for them to be unaware of the source of the problem. The Blood Moon was approaching, and the first-generation vampire's strength would increase significantly. The Sacred Blood Mountain clearly wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to attack the Red Talisman Association's stronghold and kick away the Black Prison Cliff, eliminating these two hidden dangers in one fell swoop. End of chapter. Chapter 1795. After Lu Yi learned that Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched troops to Black Prison Cliff, he immediately left with Xiang Yin and the others. It wasn't that he was afraid. According to the information he received, Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched over 20 Yu Yao cultivators to deal with Black Prison Cliff. Their numbers were much greater than his side, but if they really fought, Sacred Blood Peak's side would be the ones to suffer. After all, the suppression of Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was something these first-generation blood race cultivators couldn't ignore. Not to mention himself, even Xiang Yin and the others had far more Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature than their enemies. Even so, Lu Yi wasn't confident he could exterminate these invaders. After all, they were all Yu Yao cultivators, so who knew what kind of mysterious methods they had. Once his own information was exposed, it would definitely attract Blazing Heaven's attention, which would be detrimental to his next plan. If things went wrong, Blazing Heaven might personally take action. He planned to keep his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature a secret before fighting Blazing Heaven. Only then would he be able to catch Blazing Heaven off guard. Although Sacred Blood Peak knew that his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was very strong due to Xiang Yin's tip-off, they didn't know how strong it was because they hadn't truly felt it and couldn't imagine it. Lu Yi didn't want to fight Blazing Heaven at this time because even if he defeated him with his Sacred Blood Peak, he wouldn't be able to exterminate him. The battle for Black Abyss half a year later was a very good choice. Black Abyss was the battlefield he had chosen. Due to these considerations, Lu Yi decided to abandon Black Prison Cliff and bring his subordinates away. He also wanted to sell a favor to the Red Talisman Society and let them know that he was someone they could cooperate with. Rizhao was undoubtedly very strong, but before they fought, Lu Yi didn't know if he was Blazing Heaven's match. If he could cooperate with the Red Talisman Society, it would undoubtedly increase his chances of winning. The sea of blood surged forward, enveloping all the cultivators on his side. Lu Yi quickly received a message from Hu Dequan. There was nothing else in the message other than a place to hide. The Red Talisman Society had been fighting a battle of wits and courage with Sacred Blood Peak for many years. Even though their strength was far inferior, they had never been exterminated because they relied on their ability to hide. It could be said that the Red Talisman Association possessed countless concealed strongholds in this world, and Hu Dequan had revealed one of them to Lu Yi. On one hand, it was to repay Lu Yi's kindness and to thank Lu Yi for the information he provided earlier, and on the other hand he was probably probing Lu Yi. Lu Yi kept saying that he was someone he could cooperate with. Since that was the case, then he should give him a place to hide. If he dared to go, then there was no doubt that he was sincere in cooperating. If he didn't dare to go, then he must be hiding something. There was nothing Lu Yi didn't dare to do. He was worried about where to hide, so he immediately sent a message of thanks and led his men to the location of the stronghold. The haze in the sky gradually thinned, and the blood moon showed signs of appearing. At the same time, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were retreating hastily. Even though they didn't know if the information provided by Lu Yi was reliable, they would rather believe it than not. Especially when Lu Yi had already found the base. Of course, after retreating, Hu Dequan and the others still hid in the distance to investigate the situation. 2 days later, a large number of cultivators from the St. Blood Mountain found this place and began to bombard it without any explanation. Hu Dequan and the others' eyelids twitched as they secretly rejoiced at Lu Yi's warning. Otherwise, even if the Red Talisman Association wasn't destroyed this time, it would suffer heavy losses. When the Battle of Black Abyss began half a year later, they would no longer have the ability to resist. At this time, Lu Yi was in a mountain valley, looking up at the blood moon and prying into its mysteries. Since coming to the inner world, Lu Yi had been condensing his own blood except when the blood moon was in the sky. So far, this was already the third time the blood moon had appeared in the sky. The progress of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune was pretty good, and Lu Yi estimated that he should be able to complete it after 2 more times. According to the pattern of the blood moon's appearance, he would definitely have 2 chances in half a year. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility of an accident. But Lu Yi couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't control the timing of the blood moon's appearance, so he could only wait. For the next period of time, the Red Talisman Association would be completely dormant. With their base destroyed, they would lose the spirit plants they had painstakingly cultivated. From now on, they would no longer have any resources they could use. Although Lu Yi had given them a batch of spirit plants before, they wouldn't be able to last for long. Therefore, the Red Talisman Association felt very anxious and decided to fight the Saint Blood Mountain in the next Battle of Black Abyss. If they missed this opportunity, the Red Talisman Association's situation would become more and more difficult in the future. Because of this, the Red Talisman Association began to take the initiative to contact Lu Yi more frequently. Because from the past, they could determine Lu Yi's position against the Saint Blood Mountain. Coupled with the fact that time waited for no man, they had no other choice but to join forces with Lu Yi. This was undoubtedly Lu Yi's wish. After coming to this world, he initially wanted to integrate into the Red Talisman Association and fight the Saint Blood Mountain together with them, but because of some twists and turns he didn't get to do so. He understood the choice of Hu Dequan and the others at that time and didn't feel resentful because he couldn't explain the secret of the talent tree to others. Although the process was a little complicated, the result could be considered to be satisfactory. Looking at it this way, his method of gathering the rogue cultivators was correct because without this force, the Red Talisman Association might not have paid attention to him. The greatest harvest Lu Yi obtained from the Red Talisman Association was all kinds of information about the Battle of Black Abyss. The more he learned about this matter, the more certain he was that choosing to fight Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss was a wise decision. In the secret area of the stronghold, Lu Yi was condensing his own treasure blood when a sound talisman suddenly vibrated. He took it out to investigate, thinking that it was Hu Dequan who had contacted him. Recently, their relationship could be said to be growing day by day. After discarding the inherent concept of rejection, Hu Dequan found that Lu Yi was worthy of a deep friendship, so he would often send him a message to discuss some matters. Currently, the relationship between the two parties was very close. They were just short of staying together. However, there would still be occasional interactions between the two parties. They got along very well. But after investigating the sound talisman, Lu Yi discovered that the one who contacted him was not Hu Dequan, but ghost cultivator Zhou Tianbao. Sir, I've been exposed. This subordinate will fight to the death. In addition, please be careful. Blazing Heaven has been in seclusion cultivating a secret technique and seems to have reached the minor accomplishment stage. After checking the information in the sound talisman, Lu Yi lowered his eyes slightly. He had expected that Zhou Tianbao would be exposed. Ever since he gathered many rogue cultivators, he began to target Sacred Blood Peak and destroyed several squads that went out to carry out missions. Before this, Sacred Blood Peak's encirclement of the Red Talisman Association and Black Prison Cliff had failed. As long as the cultivators of Sacred Blood Peak weren't fools, they would definitely be able to guess that there was a problem within their stronghold. Otherwise, the enemy wouldn't have moved in advance. After realizing that there was a problem within their stronghold, Sacred Blood Peak would inevitably investigate. Once such a situation occurred, Zhou Tianbao would be exposed sooner or later. This was because during this period of time, all the information about Sacred Blood Peak had been leaked by him. If Sacred Blood Peak followed the clues, there was no way Zhou Tianbao would be able to escape. Lu Yi had previously asked him to inquire about Blazing Heaven's situation because there was something he was very concerned about. Recently, Blazing Heaven had been doing something and hadn't shown himself. Even when the Red Talisman Association's stronghold was targeted, Blazing Heaven still hadn't appeared. Zhou Tianbao had clearly discovered something. It could even be said that Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage that allowed him to discover Zhou Tianbao's betrayal. Secret technique. Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune. When the Blood Moon was in the sky, the Spirit Rune hidden within the Blood Moon wasn't a secret. If he could pry into it, other cultivators would naturally be able to pry into it as well. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had once studied the Blood Moon and faintly felt that the Spirit Rune hidden within the strange Blood Moon was related to a secret technique. However, they couldn't find a way to enter it and could only helplessly give up. As for observing the Spirit Rune itself, the Blood Eye Spirit Rune was simply too complicated. No matter how outstanding a Spirit Rune master was, it was impossible to completely construct this Spirit Rune. If it weren't for Lu Yi's talent tree, he wouldn't have wasted this time. The Battle of the Black Abyss in the New World was about to begin, and Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage. This wasn't good news. When Lu Yi tried to contact Zhou Tianbao again, the sound talisman couldn't be transmitted. This undoubtedly meant that Zhou Tianbao was dead. Moreover, through the perception of his own sacred blood, Lu Yi couldn't detect any traces of Zhou Tianbao, the Blood Warrior. It was a pity. Lu Yi had also thought about whether or not he should let Zhou Tianbao leave Sacred Blood Peak in advance, but in the end he didn't do so. This was because Zhou Tianbao wasn't the only spy he had planted in Sacred Blood Peak. Every time Xiang Yin and the others went out to carry out a mission, he would give them a jade box so they could use it at their discretion. Sealed in that jade box was none other than the blood treasure he had painstakingly condensed. Zhou Tianbao had to die. Only with his death could Sacred Blood Peak relax their vigilance and protect the other spies. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi sent a message to Hu Dequan, informing him that Blazing Heaven had come out of seclusion. The Red Talisman Association and its people needed to lay low even more thoroughly. After Blazing Heaven came out of seclusion, he would definitely make a move. Once he found any clues, there would inevitably be many casualties. All of this was to accumulate strength for the final battle of the Black Abyss. Lu Yi had distributed a large number of resources just so that the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association could maintain their strongest strength at all times. Half a year passed by in a flash. In a secret room of the stronghold, Lu Yi sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. His divine sense constantly surged like a tide. Under his inner vision, the leaves of the talent tree were burning fiercely. Some of the leaves that were originally blank were now densely packed with yin and yang elements that were intertwined with each other. As his spiritual sense surged, even more yin and yang elements began to spread out in all directions. Lu Yi was currently inscribing Blood Eye Spirit runes on the talent tree. After observing the blood moon for the third time half a year ago, he had waited for another 2 months before the blood moon appeared again. Lu Yi still hadn't been able to observe it completely. After waiting for several more months, it wasn't until a few days ago that he was able to observe the blood moon for the last time. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.